It's a perfect summer day. You're relaxing on the beach, dipping your toes into the cool water, when suddenly, bam! A 56-foot aquatic nightmare rockets from the waves. It's the size of 2 London double-decker buses, sporting about 60 razor-sharp teeth, including bonus chompers on the roof of its mouth, because why not? This aquatic beast isn't picky about its diet either. Sharks? Turtles? Other sea monsters? Yep, they're all on the menu. Meet the mosasaur, a group of marine reptiles that ruled the oceans millions of years ago. If you've seen Jurassic World, you'll recognize them as the stars of that epic moment when a massive creature leaps out of the water to snatch a great white shark like it's sushi. That's a mosasaurus, and it's every bit as terrifying as it sounds. Recently, scientists stumbled upon a fossil of one of those marine monsters in, of all places, Mississippi. Yes, Mississippi, the land of magnolias and catfish. Turns out it's also home to ancient sea dragons. This discovery was a happy accident. A team of geologists was mapping the terrain in east-central Mississippi when they noticed something strange poking out of the ground. It wasn't a rock or a seashell. It was a vertebra. And a massive one. In fact, it was so large it barely fit in the hand of the scientist who found it. The fossil likely belonged to the largest known species of mosasaur, the Mosasaurus hoffmanni. Now, the biggest mosasaur ever found clocked in at a staggering 56 feet long. This new specimen hit a solid 30 feet at least, and while it might not break the world record, it certainly makes the crown for the biggest mosasaur ever discovered in Mississippi. Fun fact, that's still longer than the average RV, and with way worse gas mileage. To be fair, the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science already had a couple of mosasaur fossils in its collection. But this newcomer might just steal the spotlight. And this isn't an isolated incident. In 2015, paleontologists unearthed the skull of a 24-foot-long mosasaur in North Dakota. Years later, a private fossil hunter, yes, that's a thing, found an equally huge mosasaur in Texas. Well, its jaw at least. These sea monsters, also known as sea dragons, by the way, actually have one of the wildest origin stories in paleontology. The very first skull was found way back in 1764 in a chalk quarry in the Netherlands. And at the time, scientists thought it was a whale. Then came a second skull, which was so impressive that French revolutionaries literally looted it during the siege in 1794. Legend has it they swapped it for 600 bottles of wine. Doesn't sound like a fair trade to me. That fossil actually helped pioneer the concept of extinction and got paleontologists buzzing for centuries. Since then, mosasaur fossils have popped up all over the world, like ancient scaly celebrities leaving their mark. From the Mississippi backwoods to the deserts of Morocco, from New Jersey to Belgium, scientists have uncovered everything from teeth to full skulls, sometimes even misplacing them in museum drawers for centuries. So what exactly were these terrifying titans of the deep? Well, let's just say, if ancient oceans had a most likely to eat everything in sight award, the mosasaur would win it. Picture a gigantic scaly torpedo with a mouth full of about 60 razor-sharp teeth, including some growing on the roof of its mouth like dental overkill. It had a long, muscular tail for propulsion and 4 paddle-like limbs that worked like turbocharged oars, letting it cruise through warm, shallow seas like a reptilian speedboat. Scientists believe they were close relatives of modern monitor lizards and snakes, which honestly just makes both of those animals way more terrifying. Some mosasaurs even might have had adaptations for sensing vibrations in the water, allowing them to detect movement from a distance, similar to how sharks use electroreception today. Their eyes were well developed too, giving them sharp vision in the dim ocean depths, a key advantage when hunting fast or elusive prey. But what really makes mosasaurs the stuff of prehistoric nightmares is their attitude. They were apex predators, and they knew it. Those sea monsters weren't picky eaters. Fish, turtles, birds, sharks, other mosasaurs. Basically anything that moved was dinner. Fossilized mosasaur stomach contents prove they practiced family dinner in the most metal way possible. If they were around today, your beach day would be a lot more exciting, and probably shorter. These guys were so intense, they dominated the whole world. It's safe to say, mosasaurs were the undisputed rulers of the late Cretaceous oceans. And like today's orcas or great white sharks, they probably used ambush tactics, sneaking up on prey from below before striking with explosive force. Bite marks found on the fossilized bones of turtles and even other mosasaurs suggest intense underwater battles worthy of a blockbuster movie. But how did one end up in Mississippi of all places? Well, rewind the clock about 80 million years and you'll find part of North America underwater. A vast shallow sea known as the Western Interior Seaway split the continent in two, running from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. It was warm, teeming with life, and yes, crawling with sea monsters. This prehistoric seaway was a watery wonderland. Imagine long-necked plesiosaurs gliding through the water, birds with teeth diving for fish, and oysters the size of car tires clinging to reef-like structures. Even giant fish like this weird guy over here called it home. This ancient inland sea stretched over 600 miles wide in some places, but it was no more than a few hundred feet deep, making it ideal territory for predators like mesosaurs to thrive. The shallow depth also meant that their prey had few places to hide, turning the seaway into a prehistoric buffet. But the Western Interior Seaway wasn't a permanent fixture. As the Rocky Mountains rose, the seaway slowly disappeared. Over millions of years, it transformed from a shallow ocean to swamps and then to dry land. Today, what was once an ocean is now the Midwest, complete with cornfields, cows, and the occasion mosasaur vertebra hiding in the dirt. Now, this wasn't exactly the end of the mosasaurs. Sadly, even these monsters couldn't outswim extinction. Those massive sea beasts met their watery grave around 66 million years ago, when Earth got an unwelcome visitor, a 10-mile-wide asteroid. When that space rock slammed into what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, it unleashed destruction on a planetary scale. The impact triggered massive tsunamis, set forests ablaze, and shot so much debris into the atmosphere that sunlight was blocked out for months, maybe even years. This impact winter plunged Earth into a deep freeze. With sunlight gone, plants couldn't photosynthesize, and the food chain collapsed like a house of cards. On land, plant eaters starved, and predators like T-Rex soon followed. About 75% of all species on Earth disappeared. But don't think the oceans were a safe retreat. The seas were hit just as hard, if not worse. First came the mega tsunami that devastated marine life along coastlines. Then, the real villain arrived. You see, without sunlight, phytoplankton, those tiny microscopic plants that serve as the foundation of the marine food web, perished. With them went zooplankton, small fish and filter feeders. And when the buffet dried up, the big predators like the mosasaurs went hungry. No food, no future. With plunging temperatures and ocean acidification, even the ocean's top predators couldn't survive. Mosasaurs, along with plesiosaurs and ammonites, were wiped out in the blink of a geological eye. So ended the reign of sea monsters. The good news is that you can now swim at peace knowing that no sea dragon will ever come at you. I mean, it's a bummer that they went extinct, but let's be honest, beach days are way more relaxing without 56-foot lizards crashing the party.
Meet Otzi, or the Iceman, a natural mummy. He lived sometime between 3,350 and 3,105 BCE. He was discovered in 1991 in the Ostal Alps, near the borders of Austria and Italy, and yes, the nickname derives from the name of the mountain. Otzi is Europe's oldest known naturally mummified human. Otzi was 40-something when it happened. Science is awesome. We even know that he was left-handed and lactose intolerant. He was wearing shoes stuffed with grass and laced with aurochs leather. He also had a fur hat and carried a backpack with everything he needed to quickly make a fire. His body is now kept in a special room at a constant temperature of negative 21 degrees Fahrenheit. These days, Otzi is kind of a celebrity, featured in numerous documentaries and books. A decades-old mystery is solved. In 1942, Marceline and Francine Dumoulin left their home in southwestern Switzerland to get some food, but they never returned. No one knew what had happened to them. A ski resort worker solved the mystery 75 years later. He found two people dressed in 1940s fashion in ice. DNA tests revealed that they were the exact married couple. The couple had 7 children. After their parents' disappearance, the children never stopped looking for them. One of the children, Audrey Dumoulin, said she wouldn't wear black to the ceremony. She thought that white would be more appropriate since it represented hope, which she never lost. I'll take you back to 2016, an ordinary summer day. A gold miner was traveling in search of gold in Canada. He spotted something in the melting ice. He got closer. A treasure greeted him. Well, a treasure for science. The miner found the oldest and most complete wolf mummy ever discovered in the world. This wolf was part of an ecosystem that no longer exists today. The local people named the 57,000-year-old pup Zur, meaning wolf in their language. Experts have been able to get a glimpse of what Zur's life was like thousands of years ago. They've discovered that she mainly ate fish and other seafood instead of large mammals. Previously, scientists assumed that Yukon wolves mainly fed on bison or musk oxen during the Ice Age. You're hiking Mont Blanc in the French Alps. You see a small metal box blinking at you from under the ice. You slowly approach it. Oh, it's full of jewelry worth $340,000. This is a real story. The person who found the box handed it to the police. It turned out that there were hundreds of diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires inside. The markings said, "Made in India." Police already knew there were 2 major incidents regarding Indian Airways around the area, but they dated back to 1950 and 1966. The box had been hidden under the ice for at least 5 decades. Experts couldn't identify the owner of the previous gems. They believed that the box belonged to a passenger who was going to New York to sell the jewels. Well, let's hope the buyer didn't make any prepayment. Every year, new stuff comes to the surface in the area when ice melts. For instance, newspapers with headlines from the time when Gandhi became India's prime minister. Climbers also routinely find luggage and other personal items there. Let's travel 39,000 years back in time. Meet Yucca, the woolly mammoth. Yucca is special because it's the best preserved mammoth ever found. Local tusk hunters discovered it in 2010. Yucca became a natural mummy thanks to the ice preserving it. Scientists made analyses that revealed that Yucca was a 6-year-old female mammoth. Now, how about some ice worms? Yes, those do exist. They live on glacial ice in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. They spend their whole life on ice. You can see them on the surface of glaciers 2 times a day, in the evening and in the morning. They go up to feed on snow algae. Scientists call them a scientific paradox. When temperatures are low, any creature's bodily reactions slow down and energy levels drop. Cold-blooded creatures like worms become sluggish when it gets too cold. But the laws of nature don't seem to apply to ice worms. They thrive and are very active when it's freezing cold. But as glaciers are melting, ice worms' habitats disappear too. Ice worms can be up to 1 inch long and are black or blue in color. Fun fact, there are stories and songs about them. Supposedly, they give glaciers' ice their blue color, but it's just a myth. This horned lark is an Ice Age animal, not the cartoon, the actual one. Local fossil ivory hunters found this frozen lark in Siberia in 2018. Luckily, they notified experts about their discovery. After the examination, scientists found out that the bird had lived around 46,000 years ago. The most interesting thing is that the bird was in such good shape, considering that it had been under ice for millions of years. Experts say that the lark looked as if whatever had happened to it occurred just a few days ago. Turns out, the bird lived in the same era as other Ice Age animals, for example, mammoths. This book was lost for decades. It belonged to George Murray Levick, a surgeon and photographer. In 1910, he was on an expedition to Antarctica. Levick and his teammates spent months observing penguins, but they had to drop everything due to harsh weather conditions. Levick and his team were trapped in the area. They survived by digging a tight ice cave. Eventually, a ship managed to get to a nearby location and they were saved. But Levick left his notebook behind. It had lists of dates, subjects, and photographs he took at Cape Adare. Most pages of the book got dissolved, yet experts managed to save what was left of it. The notebook was published a century after it had been written. Look at this bone. It belongs to a scimitar cat. The bone was found in Klondike, Alaska. What makes it unique is that scientists managed to extract DNA from it. They found out it was a pre-Ice Age animal, more than 50,000 years old. Scientists used to assume there weren't any scimitar cats in the world, but this bone debunked previous theories. Plus, researchers found out that these cats had had natural hunting abilities, good eyesight, and endurance for long-distance running. At one point in the past, the number of animals the cats hunted started to decline, and ultimately, scimitar cats were outcompeted and eventually disappeared. Not just iceworms, but also viruses live in ice. Researchers revived 33 types of ancient viruses which had been frozen 15,000 years ago. 28 of them were unknown to science. It might sound a bit scary, but scientists say that these viruses are unlikely to harm people. You can put your doomsday pack aside. Before, viruses even older than these ones were revived without any problems. For instance, in 2014, scientists found a virus that was around 30,000 years old in, guess where? Yes, Siberia. But microbes that can cause problems do concern scientists. For example, after a heat wave in 1941, bacteria got out of a frozen reindeer carcass trapped under Siberian permafrost. Several people living in a nearby village were hospitalized because of the effects of the virus. Who knows what other viruses can be trapped in older permafrost layers? Well, let's hope they remain where they are. Fingers crossed. Bonus: in the 1960s, an underground facility was built in Denmark. The details of the project were first revealed only in 1995. When the facility was decommissioned in 1967, its infrastructure and waste were left untouched. Authorities probably thought that the facility would be forever entombed by snow and ice. But studies claim otherwise. When the ice melts, the camp will reappear, and so will everything in it. Let's hope nothing unpleasant comes to the surface.
Antarctica wasn't always a frozen wasteland. A long time ago, it was full of life, and 56 million years ago, something terrifying stalked its jungles. A giant, flesh-eating bird. It was around 6 feet tall and weighed as much as a lion. For millions of years, nothing could challenge it. So why did it disappear? And could there be even bigger predators still hidden beneath the ice? Paleontologists found 2 massive claw bones in Antarctica, sharp, curved, and powerful, belonging to this bird. They were dug up from the Epresian-aged rocks of Seymour Island, which means they're around 40 to 50 million years old. Their shape left no doubt. These were the so-called terror birds. Their scientific name is Phorus rhasidae, some of the most fearsome predators to ever walk the earth. They were flightless and didn't even need wings. Instead, they could sprint at breakneck speeds, like ostriches from a nightmare. For millions of years, these birds ruled South America. But now, for the first time, their presence has been confirmed in Antarctica. No surprise here. Back then, South America and Antarctica were still connected, allowing animals to easily commute between continents. So these birds probably migrated south to adapt to life on Antarctica's prehistoric landmass. It didn't just survive here, it thrived. But at some point, this nightmare of an animal vanished. Why? Most likely because of the temperature changes. Antarctica was cooling, slowly turning into the frozen wasteland we know today. Its prey may have declined, leaving the predator without enough food. Eventually, it disappeared.
leaving no descendants behind. Researchers hope that they'll find a complete skeleton eventually. They're also wondering where there might be even bigger species waiting to be discovered. Perhaps these birds evolved into a completely new Antarctic lineage. But for now, all we have are two giant creepy claws. People often think that there are almost no animals or plants in Antarctica. But that's not true at all. Penguins waddle around, and forget the cute tiny ones. Antarctica used to have 6-foot-tall monsters. The emperor penguins are the largest penguin species alive today. They can dive over 1,800 feet deep and hold their breath for over 20 minutes. There were giant ancient penguins around 38 million years ago. They were the size of humans. Fossils show they had long, sharp beaks, making them terrifying hunters of fish and squid. The fish there are also absolutely fascinating. Forget giant squids. Colossal squids are nightmares even bigger. Some reach over 40 feet long with massive, super sharp beaks and eyes the size of dinner plates. Finally, orcas, the apex predators of the Antarctic Ocean. They hunt in packs, working together like a wolf pack of the sea to take down seals, fish, and even massive whales. There are even tiny plants like moss and algae. Antarctic hairgrass and pearlwort. They somehow survive against all odds. There are many other myths going on about Antarctica. For example, some people think that when icebergs break off from glaciers, they immediately start drifting straight into the open ocean until they melt. But the reality is way more chaotic. First, when an iceberg breaks off from a glacier or ice shelf, it has to deal with underwater obstacles. It can stay stuck on the seafloor for decades without moving. Then they get caught in powerful whirlpools and spin in place for months. One iceberg, a 23A, spent nearly 40 years frozen in place before finally breaking free, only to get caught in a swirling ocean vortex for another 8 months. After that, their paths are influenced by ocean currents, tides, winds, and even underwater topography. They don't just float freely. Their movements are full of literal, unexpected twists. And speaking of glaciers, another strange rumor is that some humans can't travel more than 311 miles inland in Antarctica because of an impassable ice wall, freezing jet fuel, deadly winds, and no oxygen. But this is completely false. Antarctica has been explored by planes, vehicles, and even scientists on foot. There's an entire research station sitting at the South Pole. People live there all year long. The ice wall is real, a massive ice cliff rising above the ocean. But that isn't some secret barrier, it's an ice shelf. These are thick slabs of ice that form when glaciers slowly flow off the land and spread over the ocean. Almost 3/4 of Antarctica's coastline is made up of them, but they don't form some giant ring around the world. Antarctica is one of the most extreme places on Earth, but we've conquered its challenges, and we keep learning more about it every year. That's why every year, millions of dollars are poured into keeping research stations running, protecting wildlife, and making sure the people who live there have everything they need. But where does all this money go? Well, Antarctica stations are basically small cities. There's electricity, heating, water purification, food storage, and medical facilities. The biggest station, McMurdo, is basically a town with over 1,000 people in summer. It has everything from a fire station to a gym. The South Pole Station is super deep inland, so it's one of the hardest places to supply. Getting food and fuel there requires airplanes flying thousands of miles in extreme cold. But the internet loves a good mystery. When Google Maps revealed what looked like a massive doorway in Antarctica, conspiracy theorists went wild. People joked about everything from Bigfoot's vacation home to a secret base, or even a Star Trek spaceship hangar hidden in the ice. But there's a way simpler and less exciting explanation. It's actually a grounded iceberg. a chunk of ice that got stuck in shallow water and is now slowly melting. As ice moves across the landscape, it flows around bumps and obstacles, creating odd shapes. The process of melting, breaking apart, and refreezing can carve ice into unexpected forms. Antarctica also has incredibly strong downward-blowing winds that sculpt ice into dramatic formations over time. No secret doorway, unfortunately. And speaking of doors, for years, Ushuaia, Argentina, has been called the gateway to Antarctica. The last stop before the icy continent. The place where expeditions begin. But there's another option. Punta Arenas, Chile. Let's compare them. Ushuaia is closer to Antarctica. It's the top departure point for tourists going on cruises. But no regular flights to Antarctica. No major scientific bases operating from here. It's basically controlled by the military, which refuses to allow private flights, only commercially operated ships. Yes, Punta Arenas is further from Antarctica, but 22 countries and global organizations use it as their main base. There are regular flights to Antarctica happening there every year. Private airlines can actually operate here, making it the real air connection to Antarctica. Ushuaia may have the best location physically, but Punta Arenas actually runs the show. Argentina made a huge error in picking its Antarctic airbase. Instead of setting up a simple, accessible base at sea level, they built Marambio Base, very high, on rough terrain, completely impossible to reach by land. Everything has to be flown in by helicopter, making operations slow, expensive, and frustrating. For 50 years, Argentina stubbornly stuck to this bad decision, while Chile set up efficient, well-planned bases that the world now uses. If things don't change, Ushuaia will be nothing more than a tourist stop. But what's terrifying is that Antarctica seems to be returning to its past. It's supposed to be the coldest place on Earth, but something shocking happened just recently. For the first time in recorded history, temperatures in Antarctica broke 68 degrees Fahrenheit. This continent is buried under miles of ice. Usually, temperatures there can drop to minus 112 degrees. But in the winter of 2020, scientists recorded an insane 69 degrees on Seymour Island, hotter than many places in Europe at that time. Scientists believe there are several reasons for that. First, there are changes in the way heat moves around the planet's waters. Second, melting permafrost due to the planet warming. It looks like the climate is changing faster than expected.
Scientists found an entire city of Gallangola that was hidden beneath the dense jungles of Mexico for 600 years. It covers 360 hectares, had over 1,000 buildings, 2.5 miles of defensive walls, a network of internal roads, and a well-planned urban layout with temples and ball courts, and separate neighborhoods for the elites and commoners. For centuries, people believed there was just an abandoned fortress there, based on stories passed on from generation to generation. Until recently, there was no way to see how truly huge it was without spending years on the ground. But thanks to the new technology, a remote sensing tool called LiDAR, they got a 3D model of the area in just 2 hours from a plane. Gallangola was built between the years 1350 and 1521. It was a crucially important place for the Zapotec people, a group that had lived in the area since around 700 BCE. In Gallangola, families lived together in homes with big patios in the middle, surrounded by rooms. When families got bigger, they built more rooms and made their homes larger. The study found that both the leaders and regular people worked together to make the city better. Because Gallangola was surrounded by mountains, they used this land wisely and built their houses in a way that fit the slopes and let rainwater flow naturally. This helped keep their homes safe and strong. They were built so well that many of these buildings are still standing, even after hundreds of years. There are 2 pyramids in the center of the city. They may have been used as temples where the priests celebrated rites and ceremonies to their deities. The priests brought offerings to the altars, and the people assembled at the 2 squares that are now sunken. Then, there is also a palace with 64 rooms, some of them with circular columns on several sloped terraces. There are patios with many stairways all connected to each other. The sensing tool also found a round-shaped lookout point on a natural rock, where the Zapotec people could see their foes approaching from a distance. Researchers also noticed two circular structures that could have been used to watch the stars and measure time. They also found some tombs, so there was most definitely a city cemetery. By the end of the 1400s, the Zapotec people controlled a large territory on the Pacific coast and had successfully defended their land from the Aztecs, who were trying to take over more territory. They did the almost impossible and survived a 7-month-long siege at Gaiangola. When they won this conflict and kept control of the southern part of Mesoamerica, the Zapotecs didn't need to live in Gaiangola anymore. Staying in the mountains had its pros, but they needed fresh water and good farmland to grow food. The small city of Tehuantepec, just 12 miles away, had these conditions, so they moved there just before the Spanish arrived in 1521. Over time, Zatopek traditions started to fade, but their culture didn't disappear completely, and more than 300,000 Zapotec people still live in Oaxaca State in Mexico. They speak their own languages and keep their traditions alive. Creating the 3D model of the lost city is just the beginning of the research. Archaeologists hope that future studies of Gaiangola will help us learn more about how the Zapotecs were organized, how they ruled their cities, and how they interacted with the Spanish when they arrived. They plan to study all 1,100 buildings found in the LiDAR scan, and it will take a few years. Instead of digging up the ruins, they will use special technology to scan the land and learn more about the city without damaging it. This same tech helped scientists find another massive ancient city that lay hidden beneath the thick green canopy of the Amazon forest. A whole network of houses, plazas, roads, and canals was hiding in the shadow of a mighty volcano. For centuries, many scientists assumed that ancient Amazonian people lived in tiny huts, clearing patches of land to survive. But this city, built 2,500 years ago and inhabited for 1,000 years, proves the opposite. Now, scientists think tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people lived in complex urban societies. Scanning the area found 6,000 rectangular platforms, each measuring around 66 by 33 feet, and standing 6 to 9 feet high. These structures were arranged in clusters around central plazas, with straight roads with perfect right angles and paths connecting them. One of the roads was 16 miles long. Building straight roads like this is far harder than just following the landscape. Some of these roads may have had deep spiritual or ceremonial significance. The volcano's rich soil helped the civilization thrive, but it may also have led to its downfall. Researchers also found signs of threats to the cities, such as ditches that blocked entrances to the settlements. Maybe some people living nearby were trying to get in. The next step for the researchers will be studying the adjoining 116 square miles to know more about this large, complex society that could be bigger than the well-known Mayan societies in Mexico and Central America. Meanwhile, in 1963, a man in Turkey discovered an ancient city while renovating his own house. He knocked down a wall in his basement and found a mysterious room. He kept digging and saw a tunnel. It led to the Derinkuyu underground city. It's one of the deepest multi-level underground settlements in Cappadocia and in all of Turkey. The inhabitants lived on 8 levels and had access to cellars, storage areas, chapels, a school, a study room, and other structures. All floors were connected by an extensive network of tunnels. The underground city was probably built as a shelter. The construction is hiding at 279 feet deep, and you can't see it from the outside. The complex was large enough to shelter about 20,000 people with their livestock and food supplies. There was also a 180-foot ventilation shaft. Archaeologists believe that Phrygians first built the levels. The Romans used and enhanced the structure later. The golden time of Derinkuyu was during the Byzantine era. The next lost and found city appeared only in a few inscriptions and ancient texts, so no one could be sure it really existed. Scientists searched the majority of the coast of Egypt until one archaeologist and his team detected a colossal face looking at them from under the water. The ancient city of Thonis Heraklion was discovered completely submerged 4 miles off Alexandria's coast. In the ruins of the lost city, there were 64 ships, 700 anchors, and a treasure trove of gold coins. Archaeologists believe the 16-foot-tall statue and the temple remains are the most important findings discovered by the expedition. Back then, the city had ceremonies and celebrations that took place in the Temple of Amun. The ruins and artifacts were made from granite and diorite, so they were in good condition even after having been in contact with water for centuries. They give people a glimpse into what life was like 2,300 years ago in one of the most important trade ports of the world. The city had a network of canals, sort of like an ancient Egyptian Venice. The canals linked many separate harbors and anchorages. Towers, temples, houses, and other structures were also linked by bridges. Thonis Heracleion was the country's main port for international trade and the collection of taxes. No one really knows how the city ended up submerged, but archaeologists connect it with natural causes. At the end of the 2nd century BCE, most probably after a flood, it got covered with water. Then Alexandria, the city founded by Alexander the Great, became more glorious than Heracleion. Before Alexandria's fame, Heracleion was the main port of entry to Egypt. So after the tragedy, many ships heading for Heracleion had to change their route and go to Alexandria. Heracleion lost its glory until its discovery in 2000.
This sleek, state-of-the-art submarine named Ran was sent to explore the depths of Antarctica. But as soon as it discovered something, it mysteriously disappeared. So, what happened? It all started when scientists wanted to explore one of the most remote and mysterious places on Earth, the Dodson Ice Shelf in West Antarctica. This ice shelf, silent giant, stretches 30 miles wide. That's almost the length of New York City. It stands between two icy promontories, the Martin and Bear Peninsulas, and it hides an entire world of geological mysteries. If you think that Antarctica is nothing but a desert of super thick snow and ice, you're wrong. There are entire landscapes hidden deep down there. The underside of the Dodson Ice Shelf is a rugged, dynamic terrain shaped by the slow, relentless forces of nature. There are towering ice formations, deep troughs, and bizarre structures stretching for hundreds of feet. Scientists are super curious about it, but as you can imagine, this landscape isn't easy to explore at all. To find out more, we have to scan the area with satellites or try drilling through the snow, trying to collect the big picture, piece by piece. But these methods only gave us vague hints. The real breakthrough happened when scientists came up with the idea to let the submarines explore it. Autonomous submersibles could swoop deep into the icy waters beneath the Dodson Ice Shelf and tell us what's up down there. These robotic explorers have fantastic advanced sonar systems. It's that thing that bats or dolphins do. They can use sound to see the world. Basically, they send out sound waves underwater, and when those waves hit something like the ice shelf above or the seafloor below, they bounce back to the system. Animals feel how long it took for the sound waves to return and how they changed. And this helped them understand what's located where. For example, clicks that dolphins send out tell them where the fish are. We copied this crazy evolutionary trick and adapted it to our underwater exploration. Only our version is much cooler, with a higher level of precision, so we created detailed maps of the environment. The Ran submarine was one of those robotic explorers. It was named after the Norse deity of the sea. Ran had been meticulously programmed to navigate a treacherous landscape of Antarctica. But even with all this training, its journey led to an unexpected and eerie end. In 2019, Ran was sent to explore the depths beneath the Dodson Ice Shelf. It was a hero, the first one to go on a mission like this. The team said it was like seeing the other side of the moon. For 27 straight days, it worked tirelessly. It traveled over 620 miles beneath the thick ice. That's like a journey from Paris to Berlin. Ran went further and deeper than anyone could have imagined. At one point, it reached over 10 miles into the glacier's belly, and what it discovered down there was astonishing. Scientists thought there would be some smooth, uniform ice surfaces, but Ran revealed an underside marked by huge cracks, ridges. There were formations that looked like sand dunes, frozen in time. And finally, it found some mysterious swirling and teardrop-shaped patterns. They all looked more like art than geology. This actually tells the story of ice shelves and the ocean around it. Warm water sneaks in under the ice and melts it from below. Sometimes it smooths the ice out, but other times it carves out these weird, uneven shapes that look like patterns and drawings. And some of these shapes are huge, over 1,300 feet long. That's about 3.5 football fields. The reason why they look like swirling doodles is because the Earth spins. It makes the water turn in special ways, bending the shapes and drawing these spirals. It's called the Coriolis effect. Imagine you were on a merry-go-round and tried to throw something like a ball. It would go in a curve, not a straight line. Same thing happens with the water on Earth. Later, scientists found similar patterns in other Antarctic ice shelves, though they weren't as epic as the ones under Dodson. But Wran also discovered something horrifying. Turns out that these warm waters, aside from being great artists, are also a huge danger. The Dodson ice shelf isn't just hanging out serenely on the sea. It's part of a very delicate system and acts as a protective barrier that holds back huge glaciers in West Antarctica. The ice shelf is floating on the ocean, but it's still connected to the land. As warm water sneaks underneath it and the ice melts, the Dodson can't hold on to the land as tightly anymore. The protective barrier starts to weaken, and this lets the glaciers behind it move faster into the ocean. When those glaciers flow into the sea, they add more water, which could cause sea levels to rise, eventually changing our coastlines. Wran stumbled upon huge pockets where the ice was melting at alarming rates, all due to powerful underwater currents. It was like seeing a ticking clock on the glacier. The stakes were high, but luckily the submarine was ready. This time, it managed to return. And then, it worked for 5 more years, helping scientists with tons of useful data. The missions were daunting. There could be periods where Wran slipped into the pitch-black cavity beneath the glaciers, spending 24 hours without communication. But it was mapping every peak and every valley. It gained experience from over 40 missions below ice. Then, in early 2024, Wran went on a mission to the Thwaites Glacier. The mission was bold from the start. This place is also ominously referred to as the Doomsday Glacier. It's called that because it's slowly melting and has the potential to raise sea levels worldwide if it collapses, causing catastrophes everywhere. That's why Wran was dispatched to explore its underbelly, a place that had never been mapped so intricately before. The idea was to uncover the glacier's secrets, study how rapidly it was melting and why. This was Wran's second time exploring Thwaites. During the previous visit, it became the first sub to ever map the glacier's underside. Wran was exploring the depths from 650 feet to 1,650 feet. It sent a lot of data about how the Doomsday Glacier was slowly melting due to warm ocean currents. But while venturing into these icy depths, something went wrong. Out of nowhere, Wran vanished. Without warning, without a trace. One moment it was sending back crucial data, and the next it had slipped into the abyss. No distress signals, no final transmission, and it didn't return to the point it was supposed to. People sent extensive searches, helicopters soared overhead, drones buzzed through the frozen skies, but no sign of the submersible emerged from the glacier's grasp. After a while, Wran's batteries would certainly run away. So at this point, it had definitely been swallowed by the abyss beneath 1,500 feet of ice. That was a huge and sad loss for the scientific team. The scientists at the University of Gothenburg are now looking to replace Wran and continue their important research under Thwaites. To this day, scientists have no idea what happened to it. Some say it may have been trapped in the ice. Others believe it was pulled away by an unseen current. It also might have collided with something unexpected. Whatever the truth is, its disappearance has left scientists stunned, and it looks like the ice shelf will hold on to its secrets a little longer. At least we gained a treasure trove of knowledge from Wran's journey. Scientists keep exploring Antarctica, looking for history that hides under the snow. For example, they discovered that around 90 million years ago, a lush temperate rainforest thrived near the South Pole. They revealed an ancient world far warmer than they ever imagined. Deep in Antarctica, they unearthed fossilized roots, pollen, and spores preserved in the soil. All this shows that there was a swampy rainforest that flourished despite months of polar darkness. All these discoveries changed our understanding of Earth's climate, both in the past and the future.
So, there's a mysterious doorway in the middle of Antarctica. Some people think it's Bigfoot's vacation home, or a shuttlecraft from Star Trek, or maybe a door to Agartha, a mythical kingdom some people believe is located in the center of the Earth. Well, the scientists debunked all these poetic theories and explained that what looks like a mysterious doorway is located in an area of fast sea ice. It's offshore of the coast and is full of little islands with shallow water around them. When ice flows around hard rocks hidden underneath, it can create patterns that look odd but are totally normal. In this spot, the ice is thin, so the rocks underneath have a big effect on how the ice moves. The cold winds in Antarctica also shape the ice and snow and make it look like they're lines and shapes. So, the mysterious doorway is just a rocky ridge poking out because the ice has melted a little. The top of the doorway is the tip of the rock, and the sides are snowy trails left by strong winds blowing in the same direction. It's essentially an iceberg that got stranded and is melting in one place. One YouTuber found another out-of-place mysterious object more than 150 miles off the shore of Antarctica, a 400-foot-long ice ship. The internet went wild with theories like that the ship must have ended up there right from the Bermuda Triangle. But there was no scientific proof that it was a ship and not just a large chunk of ice. And once some other internet users revisited the place, they noticed the ice melted in the summer and the hypothetical ship was gone. Another mysterious Google Maps find in Antarctica was a pyramid. And before you make up an exciting theory about how the ancient Egyptians built a secret base here, I have to tell you it turned out to be just a mountain. It's part of the tallest mountain range in Antarctica that stretches for almost 250 miles. It's not the first pyramid on this continent, as explorers from the British Antarctic Expedition found another unusually shaped mountain and nicknamed it the Pyramid. But this one didn't even have a pyramid shape. Here's one Antarctic find that definitely won't disappoint you: a giant ice shelf that reminded scientists of the Grand Canyon. A special submarine robot named RAN covered over 600 miles under the thick ice and brought back some amazing footage of icy mountains, valleys, flat plateaus, and swirly patterns made entirely of ice. One of the strangest things RAN found was giant bowl-shaped holes, or scoops, in the ice. Sadly, scientists lost track of the robot. They think that curious Weddell seals may have accidentally bumped into RAN and caused it to get stuck. To save energy, RAN probably shut itself down, and the scientists couldn't find it again. But the team is hoping to build a new robot and continue exploring this icy canyon to see how the patterns under the ice might change over the years. Another huge Antarctic canyon was found thanks to bad weather. A team of sound experts had to pause their work at the Casey Research Station in a storm. Instead of waiting around, they decided to use the unexpected free time to map the seafloor near Adams Glacier. And that's how they found a canyon that is almost 7,000 feet deep, almost 30,000 feet wide, and stretches over 28 miles away from the glacier. During the mapping, they discovered just part of the canyon before they had to go back to the research station. But when bad weather came in again, the ship went back and mapped more of the canyon. They were working in waves up to 13 feet high and super powerful winds, but they managed to get about 15 hours of data to complete their map. On the way back to Australia, they stopped one last time, and now they've got a full picture of the canyon. Studying it is helping scientists learn more about the history of glaciers and the interaction between the Antarctic ice sheet and the ocean. Now, there's a frozen lake in Antarctica called Lake Enigma. For a long time, people thought the lake was completely frozen solid. But during one expedition, researchers found that under the thick ice, there was a layer of liquid water about 40 feet deep. To learn more, they drilled through the ice and sent down a camera to explore what was hiding in the lake's depths. The lake's water, which they think comes from the nearby Amorphous Glacier through a secret underground pathway, was filled with strange microbial life. These tiny microbes lived in mats that covered the lake bed. Some of the mats were thin and spiky, and others looked like crumpled carpets, or even small tree-like shapes that grew up to 16 inches. Many of the microbes could make their own food through photosynthesis, just like plants do, and it gave the lake a high amount of oxygen. One of the coolest discoveries was a type of microbe which usually lives in low-oxygen places. Lake Enigma might be similar to environments on icy moons like Europa or Enceladus, so it could mean that these moons also have hidden water under their ice and possibly microbial life too. One more mind-boggling discovery from Antarctica is tiny pieces of amber in mudstone, found here for the very first time. It took scientists years of studying incredibly well-preserved fossilized roots, pollen, and spores that they found back in 2017. Amber proves that resin-producing trees once grew in Antarctica, part of a lush rainforest that existed near the South Pole during the mid-Cretaceous period. Back then, disclaimer, I wasn't around then, the trees would have had to survive through months of darkness during the long Antarctic winters. Scientists believe they adapted by going dormant for a long time. The amber pieces the scientists found are tiny, but they are beautiful shades of yellow and orange with bumpy surfaces that show how the resin flowed out of the trees. This resin likely leaked out to protect the trees from insects. It was preserved because water quickly covered it and kept it safe from sunlight and air. A scientist was browsing through satellite images for brown trails of penguin waste and found 4 new colonies of emperor penguins at the base of the globe. These new colonies likely have been around for years, though 3 of them are rather small, with fewer than 1,000 breeding penguins each. One of the new colonies was found close to a place called the Lazarev Ice Shelf, where there used to be a larger penguin colony. They thought this colony went extinct in 2019, but it seems the penguins have just moved a bit because of changing sea ice conditions. So studying them can help us learn more about how emperor penguins adapt to changes in the environment. Now, there used to be a giant river system in Antarctica 40 million years ago. Researchers found proof of it after studying soft sediments and hard rocks from the frozen seabed. They looked at tiny bits of radioactive elements, like uranium and lead, and learned that the deeper dirt came from the time of dinosaurs. The dirt closer to the surface was younger and had an interesting pattern, like the kind you see in river deltas today, such as in the Mississippi River or Rio Grande. Scientists found tiny signs of life in the sand. The river that once flowed here started in the Transantarctic Mountains and traveled 930 miles before it reached the sea. Researchers kept studying newer layers of dirt from about 20 million years ago. They hope this will help them predict what the Earth's weather patterns might be like in the future.
Do you know that NASA explores not only stars, planets, galaxies, or black holes? Hard to believe, but yes. The agency also works on discoveries here on our home planet Earth. So what has NASA recently discovered? Is there life under the ice? While they were analyzing data recently, they discovered something unbelievable hiding under Antarctica's ice. And this discovery not only changes everything we know about the whole water system of the Earth, but it may also help with research about life in space. Humankind's existence might depend on understanding Antarctica and its secrets. So, the recent discoveries reveal vital information about our survival. But before we continue, let's see how much you know about this place, where it's only ice as far as your eyes can see. Antarctica is one of the world's 7 continents in the southern hemisphere. It's the 5th largest continent in terms of total area, and that means it's almost twice the size of Australia. Want to see real meteorites? Go to Antarctica. Due to its dry climate, Antarctica is one of the best places to observe space. But what's even greater is that you can find meteorites on the white surface of the continent. Scientists have already plucked about 45,000 meteorites from the ice, and they think they can see another 300,000. Since there aren't many terrestrial rocks there, it's easy for them to spot them, thanks to their dark color. Antarctica's dry desert environment also helps preserve them, even the ones that fell to Earth more than 1 million years ago. And can you imagine any volcanic activity in Antarctica? It's hard. But this place is where fire meets the ice. West Antarctica is where most volcanic activity occurs. Scientists recently found that 138 volcanoes exist in West Antarctica alone. Wow! You would think that Antarctica is always cold, but no. Its coastal regions can get as warm as 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But have you ever wondered what Antarctica would look like if there were no ice? It may seem unimaginable now, but it was not always covered by ice. That was 34 million years ago, though, so nobody could tell how the continent's surface would be without the ice. But NASA changed that. They generated computer simulations and created the most accurate map of it as of today. What they saw was incredible. The continent was not flat at all like it seemed. It's pretty bumpy with valleys, rolling plains, and high mountains. But this was nothing next to what they had discovered under Antarctica's ice. So, what is it? Drum roll, please. NASA found 2 new subglacial lakes. And what's even cooler about it is that they spotted these lakes from space. How is that? If your answer is high-tech satellites, then you're right. In 2003, NASA launched a satellite called IceSat. It measured ice sheet mass balance and cloud and aerosol heights. The satellite also helped create the ice-free map of Antarctica. In 2010, the European Space Agency launched the second satellite, Cryosat-2. It was for tracking the changes in the thickness of the ice. Then, in 2018, NASA launched the third one, IceSat-2, a follow-on to the IceSat spacecraft. It measured ice sheet elevation and sea ice thickness. It was NASA's most advanced Earth-observing laser instrument. It delivered the highest precision data. And when that was combined with the data from the other satellites, it was possible to spot these 2 new lakes near a pair of larger ones. But how is it possible that these lakes exist in the first place? The average thickness of most Antarctica ice is approximately 1.2 miles. However, it can get over 1.8 miles thick in some places, especially during the winter. So, you might think that there's nothing under there, but science says otherwise. It's not quite possible to see it with your bare eyes, but the continent's ice is slowly but constantly flowing in different directions under the force of its weight. But scientists could not figure out how water moved for many years. That started to change in 2007, when data gathered from the IceSat provided insight into what hides beneath the surface. They first discovered an entire network of meltwater lakes connected under Antarctica's fast-flowing ice streams, and there were hundreds of them. Scripps Institution of Oceanography glaciologist Helen Amanda Fricker figured that the elevation changes measured by IceSat happened because of the dynamics of these lakes. They did not hold meltwater statically. Instead, they were filling and draining continuously over time through a system of waterways. And as they did that, the ice above rose and fell. But where do they drain? The ocean, of course, and it drains a lot. A recent study, co-authored by Fricker, found that the drainage of one lake flushed as much as 198 billion gallons into the ocean in only 3 days. Countless mysteries about how nature works are still waiting to be solved. But finding the 2 new lakes will give scientists a better picture of how fast the Antarctic ice sheet will change as the climate gets warmer, and how this will affect global ocean currents and sea level rise. The filling and draining cycle of the lakes also caused the ice sheet to suffer cracks and crevices. So, the information they find from these new lakes will also give them a better understanding of the damage on the surface of the ice. They will also be able to assess how this filling and draining system influences the speed at which ice slips into the oceans and seas. And that means they can evaluate how the added fresh water may alter marine ecosystems. This discovery may also suggest whether life is under the ice. Wow! Scientists drilled through about 3,504 feet of ice and found that water samples taken from one of the lakes contained approximately 10,000 bacterial cells per milliliter. Such a high number of bacterial life is a good sign, because that means the icy waters might also support higher life forms, such as microanimals, and one of these new lakes might even be their home. But the most exciting thing is that the new lakes might help them understand whether life on other planets is possible. Scientists believe any life below the frozen surface of the planet Mars might follow the patterns seen in Antarctica's lakes. So, there is a possibility that they might find critical new information on the type of life that may have existed on the red planet. You wouldn't want to be there during the winter, though. The lowest temperature on Earth you can experience is negative 128 degrees Fahrenheit. In 2010, there was an even lower temperature of negative 135 degrees Fahrenheit, and you may feel this cold much worse due to the strong and dry winds. Did you know that the size of the ice surface on Antarctica also changes throughout the year? It's about 1.2 million square miles during the summer, but when it's winter, it grows to 7.3 million square miles. Yet, despite the change, it remains the largest piece of ice on Earth. Sorry, Arctic, you lose. Do you know these cute little penguins? Consider these animals the locals because there is no native population in Antarctica. It's a no man's land because no single country owns it. But do you know who really owns it? 5 different species of penguins, seals, and killer whales. Ha. Despite the continent's harsh conditions, you can visit it as a tourist for fishing and research purposes. Around 5,000 people reside on the continent during summer at research stations. But when winter comes, the number naturally drops down to 1,000. Antarctica's ice blanket makes up 70% of the world's freshwater reserves. Imagine what would happen if it melted. The global sea levels would be raised by almost 200 feet.
Giant vase-like sponges, otherworldly jellyfish, segmented worms covered with bristles, and large octopuses are the newest Antarctica discovery. Scientists found them after a giant iceberg had broken away, and it turned out to be a treasury of ancient life under ice. In January 2025, a huge iceberg the size of Chicago, called A84, broke off from Antarctica's George VI ice shelf, which is a large ice shelf about 280 miles long, 12 to 43 miles wide, and around 820 feet thick. In the summer, which lasts from November to late February, the ice shelf melts at the surface, and meltwater ribbon lakes form. They're elongated and ribbon-like. That's how they got their name. Anyway, when the iceberg floated away, it left part of the ocean floor wide open, and it was a spot no one had ever seen before. Scientists on the research ship Falkor 2 were nearby in the Bellingshausen Sea. As soon as they heard about the iceberg, they immediately changed their plans. They understood that it was a super rare chance to check out something unknown and amazing, like lifting a rock in the forest to see what's hiding underneath. The researchers used an underwater robot named Sebastian and explored the deep sea for 8 days. They went as deep as over 4,200 feet. Down there, they found a hidden ecosystem. There were big corals and sponges literally packed with sea animals. A whole world under the ice. The researchers thought they'd find some life down there, but they didn't expect to see so much. And this underwater ancient life wasn't just surviving, it had been thriving in that harsh, icy place for a really long time. Anemones that looked like fluffy little trees, sea spiders, ice fish, octopuses. The research was live streamed to scientists from all over the world, and those live streams are actually in open access.
the coolest thing was that some discovered creatures seemed to be new species. Yes, there are probably new species in Antarctica in 2025, and some might only live in this region. That's because Antarctica isn't just really far away. It's been cut off from the rest of the world for millions of years. The Antarctic circumpolar current surrounds it, like a big water moat surrounding a castle. But even if it turns out that those species are not new, the scientists have still found snails, worms with bristles, crustaceans, like tiny crabs and shrimp, and a species of the phantom jellyfish. Those are super rare and look otherworldly. Their official name is too complicated, so let's just call them the giant phantom jelly. This jellyfish is huge. Its bell, the round umbrella part on top, can be more than 3 feet wide. It has 4 long arms that trail behind it. Each one as long as 33 feet, about as long as a school bus. Scientists first caught one way back in 1899, but it took them 60 years to realize it was a totally new kind of jellyfish. The phantom jellyfish has a see-through purplish body that looks kind of ghostly. Instead of normal jellyfish tentacles, it has these ribbon-like arms that help it catch food and pull it into its mouth right in the middle. Even though jellyfish don't have brains like we do, researchers watching the giant phantom jelly noticed something surprising. The otherworldly creature seemed to move its arms very carefully and with control, especially when swimming through tight spaces on the seafloor. It looked like it was being very cautious and deliberate. Ugh, creepy. Another sentient being? Jellyfish have a simple nerve net instead of a brain, which helps them sense the world around them. But the way this phantom jelly moved made scientists think it might be smarter or more coordinated than other jellyfish. Studying it can help scientists learn how animals without brains still manage to explore and survive in tricky places underwater. Another cool find was little worms called bristleworms. Scientists call them polychaetes. But let's stick with bristleworms because it kinda sounds fun. Lots of different kinds of them live in super cold, deep parts of the ocean. Bristleworms have bodies made of many segments, and they have tiny little bristles all along their sides. These bristles help them move around, feel what's near them, and even protect themselves from danger. One cool example is the Antarctic scaleworm. It's a type of bristleworm that lives in really cold, deep waters and has shiny, golden bristles that make it look pretty fancy. During Antarctic deep-sea exploration, the team also found giant sponges shaped like vases. Usually, sponges grow very slowly. So to get that huge, they must have been growing there for a really long time, maybe even hundreds of years. Their size shows that the deep-sea animals living around them didn't just move in recently. Those sea creatures have been there for decades and managed to form thriving communities under the ice. So, it really was ancient life hiding under all that ice. And that surprised scientists a lot. In older studies, people used to drop cameras through holes in the ice or visit iceberg areas long after the ice had broken off to explore hidden ecosystems. Back then, they mostly saw bare, empty seafloor with just a few living things. But this time, the team arrived just weeks after the giant iceberg broke away, and they got to see what was hiding right underneath it. The first 9 miles behind the ice shelf can hide rich and busy ecosystems. The area is dark, cold, and hidden for ages, and still, all kinds of creatures live there. This shows that life can survive in places that seem too harsh or frozen for anything to live. On the other hand, finding all this life down there isn't super surprising. Lots of animals live in dark, cold places underwater, so it makes sense that they'd be under the ice shelf too. The ice kind of hides them and keeps them safe from anything going on above. But what's weird is how many different kinds of creatures live there, even though it used to be a really closed-off space. It actually looks a lot like the seabed in parts of Antarctica that don't have ice on top. How can that be?
Usually, tiny plants called phytoplankton grow near the surface where sunlight hits. Little shrimp-like animals called krill eat those plants at night. When krill get full, they sink down and bring food and nutrients to the ocean floor. Even their waste helps feed the deep-sea creatures. But if there's a huge ice cap above, sunlight can't get through, so no plants can grow there and no krill bring food down that way. Scientists thought this would mean less food and fewer animals down there, but they found a lot of life anyway. Turns out, food and nutrients probably sneak in under the ice, carried by underwater currents, kind of like rivers flowing under the ocean. Scientists found some animals that lived a long time, so it looks like those currents, which mostly come from melting glacier water, bring enough food to keep the ecosystem healthy and full of life. No one really knows what's going to happen to all that deep-sea life now that the iceberg has floated away. Those creatures have lived under the thick ice for who knows how long, in super stable, pitch-black conditions. Obviously, they're not exactly fans of change, so losing that icy roof might totally mess with their whole setup. One of the scientists mentioned that the ice shelf the iceberg came from has been creeping backward, like 25 miles over the last 50 years. That's a part of a bigger pattern. Antarctica's ice is melting faster and faster, which pushes sea levels up around the world. That's why this Antarctica discovery matters. The team's trying to figure out not just what's happening now, but how this hidden ecosystem fits into the bigger picture. If we can understand how this place is changing over decades or even centuries, maybe we can predict what's coming next. And it's pretty amazing that breaking ice can tell us so much, right?
Consider Lake Enigma. What a fitting name. It's already strange enough because it's not even supposed to exist. But now, we stumbled upon actual life deep beneath it. And this just might help NASA in their search for life in outer space. The lake lies deep in the icy heart of Antarctica, so it's not really a water pool like we're used to, more like a lake-like block of ice, or so we thought. Just recently, Italian scientists discovered a secret that had been buried for ages, an actual body of water, and in this water, life is thriving. Various microorganisms, and even some weird little hunters. Which is super weird, since Enigma sits in a remote and harsh corner of our planet, the northern Victoria Land in Antarctica. The entire South Pole is cold, but in this place, temperatures can plummet to a horrifying minus 41 degrees Fahrenheit, though on average it's around 7. Chilly. Like we said, this lake shouldn't even be there at all. Antarctica is technically the largest desert on Earth, even though it's covered in snow, because it's super dry. There are 0 rains, truly little snowfall, and the sun barely evaporates anything. And even if there is some water, the insane winds make sure to dry everything out super quickly. Putting on our thinking caps, this lake should lose an unimaginable 7 million cubic feet of water every year. Yet, the water remains. Why? No one knows. Scientists say there could be something deep underground that refills it constantly. They just have no idea what that might be. Maybe deep underground rivers, melting ice, or something else entirely. But hence the name, the Enigma Lake. The block of ice we mentioned is permanent and super thick, at least 36 feet of it, and that's higher than a 3-story building. So researchers decided to check out if there's anything beneath it. They used a so-called ground-penetrating radar, a super smart echo detector for the ground. This radar sends invisible radio waves into the Earth. When they hit something underground, like rocks, water, or anything else, they bounce back to the device. By measuring how long it takes for the signal to return and how strong they are, we can determine the distance and what exactly the radar hit. That's how animals like bats, whales, and dolphins can see underwater. And we humans stole this cool nature idea to research buried structures and hidden caves. Scientists used this device all over the Enigma surface. This way, they were able to create an entire map of this under-ice world beneath. The water itself wasn't surprising. It's the unique ecosystem in it that shocked them. Unfortunately, no secret monsters or extraterrestrial secrets this time. But there are microorganisms there that may not exist anywhere else on Earth. Somehow, these creatures have managed to survive in complete isolation and extreme cold. It's not that we don't know these microorganisms, we've met them before, just not exactly like this. There are a couple groups hanging out down there. The first one is Bacteroidota. They love breaking down complex molecules, especially in your stomach, and help digest tough plant fibers. They mostly hang out inside us, but in the outside world, we might occasionally find them in soils and oceans. Then Actinobacteriota, genius chemists among bacteria. They decompose organic materials and help the soil get healthier. They're also famous for producing antibiotics, so we owe a lot of our medicine to them. The third one is Pseudomonadota. These guys weren't a surprise. They're crazy adaptable. They can thrive pretty much anywhere, from soil to water to the human body. Some of them are good, helping plants grow and in nutrient cycles, but others can be opportunistic pathogens. Ooh, bad guys. But what is actually a surprise is that Lake Enigma has tons of Passibacteria. They're ultra small even for microorganisms and can barely do anything themselves. So they prefer to live in symbiosis or be little parasites, relying on their hosts for nutrients and other necessities. All these little chompers might be ancient. They could be remnants of a time before the lake froze over completely, which is hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's simply weird to encounter these bacteria in the Enigma Lake, especially the little parasites. Passibacteria usually love low-oxygen environments, but this lake is very oxygen-rich, not even mentioning an almost 40 feet of ice above. So all this means that even though we know who these guys are, this specific species might be new to us. They could have evolved with some unique adaptations and abilities using the lake's unusual chemistry. They probably rely on a super simple and delicate food web. Some of the microorganisms produce energy from light, well, whatever light gets down there, or the lake's chemicals. The symbiosis guys most likely survive by living on or inside their neighbors. Yep, these microscopic creatures hunt each other. Nope, things can't be peaceful even in a place like that. If we find out what their secret to survival is, we might learn more about chemistry, medicine, and even extraterrestrial life. Because if life can endure such extreme conditions, then it can probably appear pretty much anywhere, including our closest neighbors, Europa or Enceladus, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. They definitely hide oceans beneath their frozen surfaces, and now there's a very high chance there might be some life there. Antarctica must be the closest thing we have to extraterrestrial exploration before we actually land on other planets. It's full of hidden mysteries and surprising creatures. Even outside of Lake Enigma, the South Pole harbors life. Just take the McMurdo Dry Valleys, which are often referred to as Earthly Mars. These are among the most mysterious and extreme places on our planet. They're stretching across Victoria Land in Antarctica, and this is one of the driest places on Earth. Makes sense if you remember the name. Surprisingly, unlike other parts of the South Pole, this land is almost entirely devoid of snow and ice, just lots of super cold ground. There might even be some sand dunes nestled here and there between the rugged mountains. The ground is mostly covered in loose gravel, scattered with ancient rocks made of granite, and something interesting called gneiss, just spelled differently. It's the type of rock that's been through a lot, literally. It's usually born when granite and sedimentary rocks have to endure insane pressure or horrifying heat for a while, a process called metamorphism. These conditions are so intense that they literally rearrange the minerals into layers. That's why gneiss has such beautiful foliated looks. It's the planet's version of baking a layered cake. It's amazing because this place is almost exactly the way it was millions of years ago. These valleys are frozen in time, and they give us a little glimpse into Earth's distant past. And that includes life. Once again, local winds are absolutely terrifying gusts of cold air racing downhill, and they evaporate snow faster than it can even melt. So, logically, you shouldn't find much water here, not even mentioning life. But somehow, you can still stumble across frozen lakes and saline ponds in the dry valleys. And local life stretches all reason and our understanding of biology. It exists inside the rocks themselves. Microorganisms are hidden in slightly moist cracks and crevices. Deep inside, there's endolithic bacteria. These guys are super chill. Instead of moving around like other microorganisms, they always stay put inside their little rocky homes. How do they survive? Through photosynthesis. Just like plants, they take teeny tiny parts of light that gets in crevices and acts like little solar panels, getting energy from the sun. Meanwhile, in another place, beneath the Taylor Glacier, there's bacteria that literally doesn't eat anything. Not comfort, not sunlight, not even oxygen. These guys rely on a diet of dusty rocks and sulfur to fuel their weird metabolisms. By breaking down sulfur and iron, they get energy to sustain themselves. This way, they easily survive in deep seas at sub-freezing temperatures, completely cut off from sunlight, oxygen, and the world itself. This place is fascinating for both its life and the lack of it. In some parts of the valleys, like University Valley, yes, that's what it's called, the permafrost is so harsh that no microbes were found at all. This might be one of the only places on Earth where life appears to be completely absent, a quite scary idea. Anyway, now scientists are thinking about learning more about Lake Enigma and drilling this Mars-like environment. Exactly for that reason, to see how we could get samples from Mars in the future. Hey, look at this rock. At first sight, it looks like a regular boring rock, the likes of which you can see when walking along the beach. Its color doesn't stand out, and its weight is pretty regular, around 4 pounds. But everything changes when you learn that this rock was born on Mars, traveled all the way to Earth, and ended up in Antarctica. Ah, now the story sounds much more fascinating. So let's find out the details. Researcher Roberta Skor, who worked on the ANSMET project, which stands for Antarctic Search for Meteorites, of the Denver Antarctic Program, found this meteorite in 1984. If you want to decipher the name of the space traveler, I can help you. It comes from the place where the scientists spotted it, the Allen Hills of Antarctica, hence ALH. And then we've got the year of the discovery and the number of the sample. If you think that Roberta picked up the rock and exclaimed something like, "Woohoo, I'm holding a chunk of Mars," I'll have to disappoint you. At the very beginning, it was totally unclear where the meteorite came from. And one thing confused researchers even more. The meteor was very different from other meteorite groups found on our planet. Okay, but then how did they finally figure out it was a visitor from Mars? All thanks to traces of gas similar to those that make up the atmosphere of the red planet. We learned about its composition thanks to the brave Viking lander that carried out the necessary analysis in situ in 1976. Anyway, back to our rocky discovery. It's actually very special, and not only because the rock arrived from far, far away. Among those several thousand meteorites found on Earth, just around 100 have likely come from Mars. And even so, our guy is different from them and seems to be part of a separate group. So let's go into the past and follow the life story of this cosmic traveler. It most likely formed around 4 billion years ago on its home red planet. One day, which wasn't very different from others, turned out to be life-changing for this peaceful rock. A meteorite impact catapulted into space, and it started its own journey as a small asteroid. At that time, it was way larger than at the moment of discovery on Earth. At one point, ALH got close to Earth and, who knows, probably decided to explore something. That's how, 13,000 years ago, it ended its space journey by colliding with our planet. At the moment, this Martian fragment is the oldest we've got. But at first, it wasn't all that popular. Only in 1996 did it become way more famous after a groundbreaking discovery. You see, some NASA researchers started wondering, well, the fragment is obviously very old, but then, could it have recorded any traces of life that could have been thriving on Mars at the time ALH formed on the red planet? And guess what? Those scientists turned out to be right. They detected traces of very fine magnetite particles. Those were completely similar in structure and chemical composition to the particles we have on Earth. They're called magnetofossils, and magnetotactic bacteria produce them. So it might mean that, at one point, there were some forms of life on Mars. In April 2020, scientists from the Japanese Space Agency made another discovery. They detected nitrogen containing organic material of Martian origin in our meteorite. So, who knows what new astounding secrets further examination of the meteorite might reveal? At the moment, though, all you can do is travel to Antarctica and find more of them. The thing is, this place is great for meteorite hunting. Surprisingly, we have found nearly 50,000 meteorites in Antarctica, and hundreds of thousands are still waiting to be discovered. Each of these space rocks can tell us a story of the evolution of the solar system. For example, the very first lunar rock found on the icy deserted continent proved that chunks of space objects larger than asteroids can also end up on Earth. So, let's say you got inspired and decided to go meteorite hunting all the way to Antarctica. Well, get ready for some serious challenges. Despite their potential abundance, finding space rocks isn't as easy as it might seem. You'll have to visit remote areas, and there's still no guarantee that you'll be able to spot a meteorite. And that's actually a huge problem. Meteorites are vanishing from sight. Currently, scientists find about 1,000 meteorites in Antarctica each year. But according to a new study, about 5,000 more get hidden out of sight every year. The culprit is warming temperatures. Worried scientists created a model that could help them figure out where those meteorites might surface. This model was quite complicated, taking into consideration snow cover, surface temperature, the speed at which ice flows, and even the steepness of the terrain. After that, they ran simulations under various warming scenarios. It turned out that meteorites indeed sank out of sight as temperatures rose. To say that the researchers were upset is obvious. They didn't expect that climate change would affect their work so much. Even though those areas are below freezing, people still managed to ruin a crucial archive of the solar system. But let's get back to your meteorite hunt. If you want your chances to find one to be higher, travel to the base of mountains or outcrops where ice, which usually flows to the lower ground, is forced to move upward. But make sure to take your windbreaker with you. In those places, powerful winds brush away snow, exposing bright, vivid blue ice. Instead of melting, this ancient ice can change directly into water vapor, and it helps expose meteorites that would otherwise remain hidden. You need to hurry though. Meteorites at the surface disappear quickly. Even when temperatures are well below freezing, the rocks can still absorb some of the sun's heat and melt the ice. It's like they're creating underground, or shall I say under ice, tunnels for themselves, sinking and hiding from sight. Sometime later, refreezing closes the entrance to those tunnels, effectively trapping meteorites inside, tucked out of sight. Now, scientists admit it's very tricky to find working methods to spot meteorites. And if we don't hurry and develop such methods, we might lose between 80,000 and 250,000 space rocks in total. No wonder scientists are on a mission to find more meteorites. They're focusing on meteorite stranding zones. Those are places where meteorites often gather on the surface because of specific features of geology, ice flow, and climate conditions. As you already know, you can find meteorites on blue ice without snow cover. This makes meteorites easy to spot. But finding such hotspots is often pure luck. Or you gotta sit day and night, scouring maps and satellite images in attempts to spot blue ice zones near research stations. Let me introduce Veronika Tolanov, a glaciologist, and her team. They've taken things to the next level by developing a smart Antarctic-wide map. To do it, they've used machine learning and satellite data from NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, and others. This map highlights areas where meteorites might be hiding based on past finds and all kinds of climate and ice data. Apparently, the best places to find meteorites are along the edges of the continent and near mountains with blue ice. Unfortunately, it's not just the blue ice that matters. The temperature and speed of the ice flow are also super important. For example, if the ice flows too quickly, meteorites get swept away before they can accumulate. So, if you want to find a meteorite, you have to wait for very precise conditions. The surface temperature has to stay below 16 degrees Fahrenheit almost all the time. Otherwise, meteorites sink. You can start with the Allen Hills region. Yup, that's where our ALH friend was discovered. This area is kind of a meteorite gold mine with more than 1,000 finds. But there are even more promising places, like the Fimbul-Hyman Mountains, and no one has searched there yet. You might be the first. In any case, with this new map, researchers developed a where-to-go index that ranks the best meteorite hunting spots, making future field trips much more targeted. And with plenty of blue ice regions still unexplored, there are tons of meteorites just waiting to be found. So, what are you waiting for?
Leave it to people wandering on Google Earth to stumble upon the world's newest and weirdest places ever. Like this mysterious pyramid discovered in Antarctica. Soon enough, the internet blew up with all sorts of theories regarding this unusual shape. Could it be a sign from a different life form? Is this pyramid indeed natural, or is it man-made? For starters, it's not the first time we've discovered a pyramid in the Antarctic. The first one was observed by the British Antarctic Expedition in the 1910s and kept secret for a long time. Its discovery being kept hidden only added to the mystery. A second such structure was discovered in 2016, which further increased the interest in the matter. The mystery was soon enough deciphered by scientists. These formations are just mountains. They're located near the Ellsworth Mountains, a range over 250 miles long, so they're just mountain peaks that have broken through the ice sheet. As for their particular shape, it's just a coincidence. Pyramids are found throughout nature. The Matterhorn in the Alps and Mount Ballenstinder in Iceland, for example, are quite similar in terms of shape. As for the official name of these peaks, they're called nunataks, or peaks of rock peeking through a glacier or an ice sheet. Antarctica has way more incredible features, like the fact that it's home of 60 to 90% of the world's fresh water. That's because its ice sheet is the biggest on our planet, stretching across 5.4 million square miles. I'll spare you the calculations, but that leaves only 1% of the continent ice-free. Antarctica's ice reaches 2.7 miles thick at its deepest point, meaning half the height of Mount Everest. Should it ever melt completely, our sea levels would rise to roughly 200 feet. It wasn't always this cold, though. At some point in our planet's history, Antarctica had some average temperatures as the city of Melbourne has today. It took a lot of research, but scientists figured out that Antarctica's temperatures could have reached up to 62.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Sure, that was 40 to 50 million years ago, but if you think about it, it was at the same time when dinosaurs roamed our Earth. Time is also different on this icy continent. All the lines of longitude that help us calculate different time zones merge into a single point at the South Pole. Here, there are 6 months of daylight in the summer, followed by 6 months of complete darkness during the colder season. So, scientists working here stay, on average, in the same time zone they've come from. The Blood Falls aren't a chapter of a thriller movie. They are merely a series of waterfalls located in one of the driest regions of Antarctica. They emerge from an underground lake filled with a special type of bacteria. These little organisms use sulfates as fuel instead of sugars, which makes them very intriguing for scientists. The water contained in this lake is so full of iron that it basically just rusts when it meets air. So, the reddish color of the waterfall also gives it its trademark name. The megalodon was the largest predator ever known in our planet's history. In terms of its location, the megalodon lived practically in all waters on our globe, except near the poles. The reason why there are no megalodon teeth found in Antarctica is probably because the gigantic creature was adapted to only warm tropical and subtropical waters. If you plan to visit Antarctica by boat someday, Just know you might not get there on a non-metallic boat. The hull of your transportation device must be made of either steel or aluminum to withstand the harsh weather conditions here. Antarctica isn't home to a lot of bugs. In fact, there is only one true species of insect that calls this place home. It's a wingless midge called Belgica antarctica. This fly is so tiny that it only reaches 0.08 to 0.23 inches long, but it's still the Antarctic's largest terrestrial animal. A lot of Antarctic fish also come with an antifreeze substance in their blood. They don't necessarily need it for protection against the cold temperature, but mostly against touching ice. These antifreezes are made up of large glycoprotein molecules. They surround any small ice crystals that may form, making sure they don't spread through the animal's tissues, which could cause a lot of damage. They also create a sort of small pillow blocking the sharp ice crystals, so they're less likely to cause any pain. It also doesn't rain a lot here on this icy continent, but one amazing meteorological quirk of Antarctica is that it's full of diamond dust. This dust is basically small ice crystals that pop out of humid air close to the Earth's surface. Think of it like an icy fog. As they flow through the air and get touched by sunlight, they begin to sparkle, making visitors here feel like they're surrounded by diamonds. It's probably the last place you'd want to go into labor, but in 1978, the first person was born here ever. Emil Marco Palma was its name, and ever since, 10 other people have been born here in Antarctica. There's a lake on this icy continent that is so full of salt, it makes it impossible for it to freeze over, even if temperatures can go as low as 5 degrees Fahrenheit. That's because pure water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Water that has salt in it, or any other substance for that matter, will freeze, but at a way lower temperature. That lower temperature is adjustable depending on the substance itself and the amount that has been placed into the water. Antarctica was the last official continent to be discovered. It remained completely unseen until the 1820s. But it took another 20 years to confirm it was actually a continent and not just a group of icy islands. Just because it's really cold here doesn't mean you can't go on a date here. One December night, an American scientist that was posted in Antarctica logged into a dating app simply out of curiosity. He was certain no other profiles would show up, but to his surprise, he found someone soon enough. Another researcher who was stationed just 45 minutes away, by helicopter of course. They eventually got together and went on the first date in Antarctica ever recorded. Apart from ice, this continent has something else way more abundantly than any other piece of land on Earth: meteorites. If we look at the research done by scientists, meteorites have equal chances of reaching any place on our planet. However, once they go through our atmosphere, the situation is a bit more complex. That's because different climates on our planet, like the humid ones found near the jungle, have a lot of moisture and oxygen, which will corrode most meteorites. The climate in Antarctica is really dry, so the possibility of meteorites corroding is little to none. More so, it's way easier to spot these rocks on the icy white surface of this area than in any other place on Earth. If you're not scared of the cold, you'll surely freak out when you hear about the winds here. That's because Antarctica is for the most part the windiest place on Earth. Wind speeds have been reported here to reach even 200 miles per hour.
There's nothing around, just the eternal, endless whiteness of Greenland's snow and cold winds blowing into your face. Nothing hints at the impending catastrophe. You take another step and freeze in horror. An abyss is spreading at your feet, bottomless and dark. If you had made a bigger step, it would have swallowed you. That infamous Greenland's hole. It happened in the middle of the 2010s. A group of geologists were scanning the surface of Greenland's Hiawatha Glacier using radar when they spotted something very, very strange. It was a giant pit, more than 980 feet deep and almost 20 miles wide. That's big enough to fit inside Washington, D.C. or Paris.
After staring at their radars for quite a while and scratching their heads, researchers decided to find out what could have made such a huge hole. Could it have been good old erosion? A raging volcano? An asteroid impact? A giant sandworm? Ugh, I might have gone a bit overboard with this worm idea, but you never know with these ancient glaciers. Anyway, in our case, one mystery seemed to lead to another, which had been puzzling scientists for decades. And to solve both of them, scientists needed something super common, but at the same time very important: quartz, one of the most abundant materials in Earth's crust. But before we dig deeper into this topic, let's make a small detour and talk about a pretty bizarre phenomenon called the Younger Dryas event. To see what it was like, we need to go deep into the past, as far back as 12,900 to 11,600 years ago. During that period, the planet became much colder, especially in Europe and North America. Now, let's talk a bit more about that weird climate change in the Northern Hemisphere. There are a few theories. One that involves a change in currents in the Atlantic Ocean. Another speaks about something large kicking tons of dust into the air and effectively blocking sunlight. The two most popular and likely hypotheses mention a volcanic eruption and an asteroid impact. Indeed, there was a volcanic eruption on the territory of modern-day Germany at around the right time. But there's also a probability that a space object struck the planet during this period too. And now let's get back to the hole scientists found in Greenland. When NASA's Ice Bridge program and Germany's Alfred Wegener Institute discovered it, it seemed they had finally found the reason for the Younger Dryas event. But was it really an asteroid that created that impressive pit and caused temperatures to drop all over the Northern Hemisphere? To test this theory, the researchers needed quartz. The thing is, in its pure form, quartz has a very simple structure. It's made from interlocking silicon-oxygen tetrahedra. Efficient and so pretty. Just look at these six-sided prismatic crystals. Since its structure is so simple and the components are so common, you can find quartz almost in any rock on the planet. At one point, magic happens. Larger rocks erode away, pushing out tiny bits of quartz sand. The scientists exploring the mysterious pit gathered the quartz sand that had been washed out from underneath a glacier. It was like looking at the rocks at the very bottom of the hole without having to actually get all the way down there. Very handy. So, while examining the material, they discovered quartz grains with the telltale signs of terrible catastrophe. They had PDFs all over them. No, I'm not talking about the document format. PDFs stand for planar deformation features, and they look like lines etched into the crystal surface. These lines are a sign that you're holding shocked quartz. It forms under immense pressure, when the internal crystals are pushed out of alignment. But the most exciting thing here is that shocked quartz only appears under the influence of powerful forces, like massive impacts or terrifying explosions. In other words, finding this poor shocked quartz under the Hiawatha Glacier could be much needed proof that the hole was an enormous impact crater that formed when something equally enormous crash-landed there. Based on the size of the crater, this space object probably was a bit more than a mile across, which is twice the height of the Burj Khalifa Tower in Dubai. A meteorite that big would have looked 3 times as bright as the sun when traveling across the sky, and it would have hit Earth with an immense force. The impact would have been so great it'd have vaporized rock and thrown debris for hundreds of miles away. The sky would have filled with dust. It would have dimmed the sun and led to a temperature drop all over the planet. And guess what? The last part about decreasing temperatures got the researchers super excited, because it opened up a possibility that the impact could have been connected to the Younger Dryas event. To prove this idea, scientists decided to use quartz again. They examined it more closely, trying to date the impact. Well, they were in for an even greater shock. The Hiawatha crater turned out to be not 12,000, but 58 million years old. On the other hand, the researchers were disappointed that they hadn't been able to confirm their theory. The crater couldn't explain the Younger Dryas cold snap, but on the other hand, it was still an amazing discovery. Now, get ready for one final twist to this story, and it revolves around quartz again. Other scientists have recently discovered more deposits of shocked quartz all over what is now the eastern USA. It was hiding in sediment layers dating to just before the Younger Dryas. Interestingly, there aren't any craters around those sites whatsoever. But quartz can't lie. It provides evidence of a powerful explosion. It makes scientists think that their impact hypothesis might still be true, but instead of a collision, it could be an airburst. A massive comet could have broken up while entering Earth's atmosphere around 12,000 years ago, and the fragments could have exploded before reaching the ground. It would have caused catastrophic mass burning throughout the North American continent and messed with the climate so much that the Younger Dryas would have been triggered. Well, I guess we need to wait a bit longer for scientists to find some further proof of this hypothesis. But it doesn't mean we don't have any more curious phenomena to explore in Greenland. Take these fascinating holes. They sure are kinda smaller than the monster we were talking about. They're called moulins, and they carry surface meltwater all the way down to the base of the Greenland ice sheet. And they have prepared some surprises for us too. Apparently, they're way larger than we previously thought. That's what a recent study based on observation and first-hand exploration claims. Even more interesting, this high volume might influence the stability of the ginormous ice sheet in question, as well as the speed at which it's sliding towards the sea. Researchers think that increased water depth and pressure inside moulins might lubricate the base of the ice sheet, making it move faster. You know, the way an ice cube slides more easily on a thin film of melted water. Until recently, we knew too little about the real size of moulins and how much water they can hold. But now, we know that moulins can be giant. The team made 2 trips to the Greenland ice sheet in 2018 and 2019. And during each of them, they used ropes and climbing equipment to drop around 330 feet into 2 separate moulins, almost touching the water's surface. Those who did it described the experience as intimidating. Picture this. Your back is over the edge. All you see is bluish ice going down and blurring into blackness. And the only thing you hear is occasional sounds of crashing ice. It must be extremely unnerving.
Ooh, you're diving into the dark and icy waters of Antarctica. The eerie blue darkness is enveloping you, reminiscent of the vast expanse of open space. In these depths, where you least expect to encounter any living creature, you suddenly hear a loud, strange sound. A quacking noise, as if a giant duck was hidden in the deep. In 1960, researchers first recorded this sound and named it bioduck. Clever. For decades, they tried to unravel the mystery of its source. Was it a giant kraken? An extraterrestrial spaceship that had crashed into the ocean? A mysterious sea monster? Or perhaps an enormous duck? There were many versions, one more bizarre than the other. Oceanographers detected similar sounds in other locations as well. Off the western coast of Australia and near New Zealand, they recorded similar but higher pitch signals, which they named bio-goose. It seems the creepy atmosphere of the story disappears with such names. Anyways, these sounds were not isolated incidents. They happened multiple times with consistent intervals. Many initially thought the source must be mechanical, given the regularity of the sounds. However, studying the oceans in the latter half of the 20th century was challenging because of limited technologies. Nevertheless, scientists persisted in collecting data on bioduck and biogoose, driven by their insatiable curiosity. As more data accumulated, so did the theories. But scientists eventually uncovered the mystery. Bioduck turned out to be a form of communication with a biological origin. When researchers analyzed the repeating sounds, they noticed that the signals never overlapped. One source would speak while the others remained silent, suggesting a form of communication. The question remained, which ocean creature possessed such an extraordinary method of communicating through varied frequency sounds? The answer, as many have guessed, is whales. Scientists compared the bioduck sound from Antarctica with the calls of minke whales and found striking similarities. The biogoose sounds from the waters off Australia and New Zealand likely belong to other species or very young minke whales. This discovery, however, only deepened the mystery. What purpose did these sounds serve? Were the whales discussing their dinner plans, laughing at the humans recording their voices, or perhaps sharing deep insights about the universe? The possibilities were endless, but the most astonishing revelation was that humans might one day learn to communicate with these magnificent creatures. Communicating with whales is no longer a far-fetched idea. Scientists from the University of California have already established contact with a humpback whale named Twain. In a groundbreaking experiment, researchers conducted a 20-minute conversation with the marine mammal. Here's how they did it. The specialists went on a marine expedition to the coast of Alaska, where they recorded the sounds of a group of humpback whales. Then they played these sounds through speakers, sending the signals back into the ocean. The recorded sounds resembled a greeting, like, "Hey, what's up?" but in the whale language. These greetings are used by whales to call each other or indicate their location. Now, soon after sending the signals, the researchers received a response. Twain approached the boat, circled it, and replied with a "hey" of its own. This marked the beginning of the first ever human-whale conversation. For 20 minutes, the scientists sent 36 signals to Twain, and each time the whale responded. Moreover, it waited for time intervals before answering. That is, the team received a response from the whale, waited 10 seconds, and turned on the sound again. Researchers then waited 10 seconds and answered. It seems that Twain was a very delicate interlocutor. Maybe it was a gentleman in the whale world, who knows? Or maybe it was simply intrigued by the unusual interaction. The signals used in this communication belonged to a group of whales that included Twain. It's likely that the researchers had recorded Twain's own sounds and used them to communicate with it. In a sense, Twain was conversing with itself. Now let's continue our journey and venture into the deepest oceanic trench on Earth, the Mariana Trench. A quick reminder, the Mariana Trench is a colossal chasm in the ocean floor, stretching over 1,500 miles south of Japan and reaching a depth of nearly 36,000 feet at its deepest point. To put that into perspective, the height of the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, is like 1/10 of the Mariana Trench's depth. Now imagine this. In this deep, dark abyss, scientists recorded a strange sound. Unlike bioduck, this sound resembled something from a science fiction movie, a low rumble, followed by a metallic ping, reminiscent of the sounds made by spaceships in sci-fi movies. Researchers named this mysterious phenomenon biotwang noises. Scientists first detected this strange sound in 2014 during an acoustic survey of the Mariana Trench, and they quickly identified its source: whales, specifically Bride's whales. Using artificial intelligence, researchers analyzed around 200,000 hours of audio recordings from the ocean and found matches with a group of Bride's whales. Like other animals, these whales use sounds as a form of communication. Now, did you know what else was found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench? A plastic bottle. It's unlikely it was done by a kraken or a whale or some type of monster. Everything is simpler here. The bottle ended up there because of a human. But that's a topic for another video. Okay, let's deal with one more sound. No whales this time, just a mysterious sound in the loneliest place on Earth. This place is called Point Nemo, and that's why it's so lonely. Located in the South Pacific Ocean, Point Nemo is the most remote spot from any land. The nearest island is 1,450 nautical miles away. It's about the same long distance from land in all other directions. Moreover, here, there's almost no marine life, since few water currents reach this spot. and therefore few nutrients are supplied. In a sense, it's a water desert. And so, in 1997, oceanographers recorded a very strange and frightening sound coming from the depths in the area of Point Nemo. It was something gigantic and scary. People called it the bloop. As soon as journalists found out about this phenomenon, people around the world began to invent the most fantastic versions. The most popular of them was that the sound source was a giant sea monster, kraken, or some other creature. The hype around the bloop didn't last very long. Scientists managed to find out the nature of the mysterious noise. It turned out it belonged to an iceberg. When they crack and collapse, they create powerful ultra-low frequency sounds that can be heard from a very long distance. To confirm this version, scientists recorded the sounds of other icebergs and heard something similar to the bloop. Oh, by the way, Point Nemo is so lonely that space agencies drop out-of-service satellites here. Space objects just fall in the water. There's a 99% chance that no animal or human will be harmed by falling debris in this lonely place. That's why many people call it the satellite cemetery. But what if, someday, a spaceship from another planet falls here? What if it has already fallen in Point Nemo and sometimes emits an emergency signal that breaks through the ocean? Ooh. All the mysteries you have heard have already been solved. How about we end this video with a mystery that still baffles scientists? Meet Upsweep. One of the most mysterious sounds ever recorded in the ocean. It's not just noise, it's a series of short ascending tones repeated at intervals of several seconds. It was first discovered in 1991 using hydrophones installed in the Pacific Ocean. At first, oceanographers suggested that upsweep could be associated with volcanic activity or underwater earthquakes. But the seasonal nature of the sound and its intensity change depending on the time of year, which rules out these versions. People began to consider hypotheses related to the biological life of the ocean. They studied the migration routes of marine animals and their behavior at different times of the year. However, despite all efforts, the sound source has not been identified. Some studies suggest that upsweep may be associated with certain species of fish or other marine animals that make sounds for communication or navigation, but no one has been able to prove it.
In 2021, while drilling about 11 feet beneath the surface of permafrost in northeastern Siberia, researchers uncovered a 24,000-year-old frozen life form. And then, they brought it to life. Before cloning it, or better said, it cloned itself. This might sound like the beginning of a sinister horror story, but don't worry, it's actually quite the opposite. What scientists unearthed was a microscopic frozen organism that could fundamentally reshape what we think about evolution and survival. The uncovered tiny creatures are called bdelloid rotifers, microscopic animals with little wheel-like mouths that they use both for moving and feeding. They were first discovered in 1696 and are fairly common in freshwater environments around the world, with a few saltwater species. They might seem unremarkable, but scientists have been studying them since early microscopes made it possible to actually see them. Because even though there are only a few dozen microns wide, they're surprisingly complex, with brains, guts, muscles, and reproductive systems. Could it be that within that complexity lies the secret to ultimate resilience, maybe even for us humans? Let's break it down. These creatures are extremophiles. That means they can survive being completely drained of water at any point in their life cycle, then lie dormant until rehydrated. But that's not all. They can also persevere through some of the harshest conditions on Earth, or in outer space, or even being stuck in the Siberian permafrost wasteland for tens of thousands of years. This is possible because they can enter cryptobiosis, a condition where organisms pause their metabolism and become nearly inactive. It may sound science-y, But actually, some of the everyday products we eat are stored in a fridge thanks to this phenomenon. Take yeast, for example. Live yeast cells are surrounded by a protective layer made of dead cells and some nutrients. You can keep yeast at room temperature, but if cryptobiosis comes into play, in the form of your fridge or freezer, it stores much better and longer. During cryptobiosis, rotifers accumulate protective compounds like chaperone proteins, which help them repair and recover once favorable conditions return. Chaperone proteins are like tiny bodyguards. Their job is to keep other proteins in the cell from falling apart under pressure. When the body is stressed, whether from heat, cold, toxins, dehydration, or just the natural aging process, the proteins inside our cells can start to misfold. Proteins need to be folded into very specific shapes to function properly, and when that structure breaks down, they become useless, or worse, harmful. Misfolded proteins can pile up and interfere with normal cell function. In some cases, they clump together in ways that poison the cell. This kind of damage is even linked to serious health conditions. So, if rotifers have developed powerful proteins that prevent cellular chaos even under extreme conditions, could we use them to protect human cells from diseases and aging? By analyzing the age of the ice they were found in, scientists figured out that these frozen rotifers were at least 24,000 years old. That's a huge leap from earlier studies, which showed they could survive frozen for only about 10 years. Now that's what you call record-breaking. This period of Earth's history is known as the Late Pleistocene Epoch, a time dominated by the Ice Age, which means these invertebrates were lying dormant when Manny and Sid were having their adventure while roaming the icy landscapes, along with saber-toothed cats and giant ground sloths. Fun fact: although animated movies like Ice Age show woolly mammoths as huge, towering giants, they were actually about the same size and weight as today's average African elephant. Nature and evolution can be so cruel, yet fascinatingly unpredictable. Massive, menacing beasts that came from the Ice Age couldn't survive it, yet something tiny and weird, like a bedelloid, could. But regarding our unfrozen creature, after the soil thawed, the organism didn't just begin moving again, it also started reproducing. This is thanks to an ability called parthenogenesis, a specific form of reproduction in which embryos develop from unfertilized eggs, allowing them to reproduce independently. It really is like cloning, but it happens naturally. Many organisms, such as certain insects, reptiles, and even some birds, are capable of parthenogenesis, at least under specific conditions. For example, in honeybees, males develop from unfertilized eggs through parthenogenesis, making them genetic copies of their mother. However, parthenogenesis is often seen as an evolutionary disadvantage because it limits genetic diversity, meaning that most species that reproduce this way eventually face extinction. Despite this, bedelloid rotifers have diversified into over 450 distinct species over millions of years, which is extremely rare. Scientists believe their survival comes down to a few evolutionary adaptations. They can pause their metabolism through cryptobiosis, repair their DNA with specialized proteins, and even borrow useful genes from other organisms using a process called horizontal gene transfer. Unlike most animals which rely solely on inherited DNA, these organisms can steal genetic material from bacteria, fungi, and even plants, splicing foreign genes into their genome to gain new survival traits. Some studies have shown that up to 10% of their active genome comes from foreign DNA. This could explain their extraordinary resilience. They borrow genes for stress resistance, toxin breakdown, or radiation repair, essentially patching and upgrading their DNA in real time. It's not like the Mind Flayer from Stranger Things, where the creature absorbs another organism to improve itself and grow. It's more like a spy stealing a blueprint from a rival lab to learn its secrets. When cells rupture, for example, when bacteria die nearby, Bdelloids scoop up loose DNA fragments and integrate them into their own genome. Interestingly, the usual expected lifespan of bdelloid rotifers under normal circumstances is only 2 weeks. The soil sample that contained these rotifers also held nematodes or roundworms, another group of tiny survivors already known to withstand tens of thousands of years icebound. This isn't just limited to microscopic animals. Researchers have successfully regrown Antarctic moss and entire Campion plants from seeds and samples frozen for hundreds or even thousands of years. In 2016, a team of Japanese scientists brought tardigrades, or simply water bears, back to life after 30 years in cryptobiosis. Tardigrades are even more impressive because they can live in a suspended state for up to 30 years, without food or water, and with temperature swings from deep freeze to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. These guys can also endure crushing deep-sea pressures, vacuum, microgravity, and intense radiation of space. Remember when we said earlier that these species can survive the harshest conditions on Earth and beyond? It wasn't an exaggeration, and now you understand why. And it's exactly why NASA and its partners sent water bears and bdelloid rotifers into orbit. They've even been aboard the ISS, helping scientists understand how these animals handle microgravity, radiation, and stress. Not only that, but in 2007, the European Space Agency launched a bunch of tardigrades into low Earth orbit, completely exposed. No suit, no shield, floating in a vacuum. They were blasted by cosmic radiation, UV light 1,000 times stronger than what hits Earth's surface, and temperatures near absolute zero. And when they came back, most of them woke up and reproduced despite the harsh conditions they were exposed to. This ties into an old theory called panspermia, the idea that life didn't originate on Earth but arrived here, locked in space dust or trapped inside a meteorite. Before, maybe it sounded like a fringe science, but when organisms can brush off cosmic radiation, then it doesn't seem so far-fetched, does it? What about humans? Does this mean we now fully understand the way hibernation works and are close to putting humans in this state? Sorry for spoiling it for you, but it still feels more like science fiction. However, researching rotifers, water bears, and similar organisms can lead to massive breakthroughs in other fields. Their resilience might be a blueprint for medicine, for reshaping what it means to age, maybe even to pause life itself, or extend it. We're talking real, practical innovations, from better preservation of human organs for transplantation to drugs that slow aging at the cellular level. And yes, maybe even cryogenic hibernation, long enough to make interstellar travel possible.
Now, this bad boy was the size of a husky and could maybe pass for one, except it didn't have any fur and was a top predator with extra long, blade-like canine teeth. Ooh, charming. Meet the earliest known saber-toothed animal to have ever lived. It roamed the Earth well before the dinosaurs. Scientists made the description of this creature based on its fossils found on the Spanish island of Majorca in the Mediterranean Sea. About 200 million years ago, none of us were around then, the very first true mammals appeared, and they lived right alongside the dinosaurs. But if we trace the family tree of mammals even further back, we'll find an ancient group called Therapsids. They didn't look like mammals we have today, but they had some key features that would eventually help define mammals. For example, Therapsids had special openings on the sides of their skulls for jaw muscles, and parts of their jaw bones would later evolve into the tiny middle ear bones that all mammals, including you, have today. So, the new discovery is what might be the oldest known Therapsid fossil. The fossil, which doesn't have an official species name yet, belongs to a group called Gorgonopsians. Those guys are more closely related to mammals than they are to any other living animals. Some of them were as small as cats, and others were as massive as polar bears. Gorgonopsians had some very mammal-like traits, like different types of teeth for different jobs. But unlike mammals, these ancient predators kept replacing their teeth, even their giant saber-like canines, over and over during their lives. Hey, that would be handy. Until now, the oldest Gorgonopsian fossils we knew about were around 265 million years old. But this new fossil is even older, dating back between 270 and 280 million years. The find was super detailed and complete, including its sharp knife-like fangs, part of its jaw, pieces of its spine, ribs, tailbones, and toe bones, plus most of one of its back legs. Even though the creature's skull wasn't complete, the scientists think it was about 7 inches long, and the animal itself would have been around the size of a medium-large dog, weighing between 66 and 88 pounds. But other than that, it didn't really look much like a dog. Even though it had some lizard-like features, calling it a lizard dog is totally wrong. Mammals and reptiles do share a super ancient ancestor from about 320 million years ago, but their evolutionary paths split a long time ago. When the newly found creature was alive, the island of Majorca was right in the middle of the gigantic supercontinent Pangaea. Back then, this area went through super wet and super dry seasons. Scientists have always wondered if major moments in mammal history happened in tropical places like this, but we just didn't have the right fossils to prove it. Now, with the discovery of the oldest known Gorgonopsian in Majorca, the missing pieces of the puzzle are coming together. It looks like some huge steps in mammal evolution could have happened in low-latitude environments we haven't explored much yet. The so-called gap in the fossil record might just be because paleontologists weren't looking in the right spots. Our hero of the day wasn't the only cool guy rocking the planet before dinos settled in. Over 500 million years ago, the weirdest predators to have ever existed ruled the oceans. The name is a bit tricky to pronounce, so I'm not going to. Okay, it's Anomalocaris, but it just literally means unusual shrimp. This creature looked nothing like anything alive today. Scientists think it was the first true apex predator, the orca of its time. Anomalocaris was massive for its era, as it grew up to 3 feet from its sharp grabbing arms to the tips of its tail fins. For a while, everyone thought trilobites were its go-to meal, but new research shows it wasn't strong enough to crack open trilobite armor. So instead, it was a speedy, agile hunter with awesome vision, and it often picked off soft-body animals that zipped through the open water. Now, another really cool creature from pre-dino times is a fish that could walk on land. Tiktaalik lived in marshy rivers that looked a lot like today's Amazon rainforest. It could grow up to 9 feet long, and it found its prey in rivers and inlets like a modern-day freshwater crocodile. It had a flexible neck and even some early versions of lungs, and thanks to them, it could survive both in water and out of it. Why fish like Tiktaalik started moving toward land about 395 million years ago is still a bit of a mystery. Around that time, the ancient supercontinent called Gondwana was drifting closer to the land that would become North America. This slow movement created lots of shallow, swampy habitats, which were perfect places for crocodile-like animals to thrive. Plus, these areas were near the equator, so they were warm and tropical. But there wasn't a lot of food waiting for them on land, so maybe they moved there for safety reasons. There were fewer predators and better spots to lay eggs there compared to the water. Creatures first adapted to living in open water, then shallow water, then marshes and river edges, and only after a long, slow transition did they finally step fully onto land. Now, how about a millipede the size of a small car and weighing as much as a large dog? This beauty lived over 300 million years ago in what is now England. Back then, during the Carboniferous period, Earth's atmosphere had way more oxygen, over 26%, compared to today's 21%. Scientists used to think the high oxygen levels were the only reason these creatures could get so big. But back then, they found a new fossil from a time when oxygen wasn't that much higher than today. They discovered it purely by accident, when a boulder split just right and revealed one of the most complete and largest giant millipede specimens ever. This one could have lived not just in swampy areas, but also in open woodlands filled with tasty seeds, nuts, and maybe even small animals. There's a chance that this beast wasn't a slow, plant-munching crawler, but a predator that would snap up whatever it could find. After dominating the Earth for about 45 million years, the giant millipedes eventually vanished. Probably the reptiles pushed them out, clearing the way for the age of the dinosaurs. Now, in case you ever wondered what would happen if you crossed a polar bear with the saber-toothed cat, here's the answer. This guy ruled the southern ecosystems after migrating 7,000 miles across the supercontinent Pangaea around 252 million years ago. It had a tough skin like a rhino's and massive canines, perfect for tearing away huge chunks of meat, and it was an excellent runner. Once it got to its new home in what is now South Africa, it replaced a whole group of local predators. But its glory didn't last long, as closer to the end of the Permian period, massive volcanic eruptions made the weather patterns change and wiped out about 90% of all species. And because top predators are usually big, slow to grow, and not super common, they often vanish among the first when massive extinction events hit. And that's how our guy here went extinct. Our final creature of the day was a dragonfly that lived around 300 million years ago and had a wingspan of over 2 feet, 6 long, spiny legs, and huge, bulging eyes, Meganjura. This 4-winged giant is most likely the largest flying insect that ever lived, and it easily outsizes today's dragonflies, which are its distant relatives. Like modern dragonflies, Meganjura like to hang out in open areas near ponds and slow-moving streams. But unlike today's dragonflies, it wasn't just catching tiny bugs. This guy was likely the top predator in these open spaces. It used the spines on its legs like a flying trap to snatch prey out of the air, including other flying insects, small amphibians, and even lizard-like creatures. Scientists found the first fossils of Meganjura in 1880 in the coal-rich rocks in France. The fossils were incredibly well preserved and showed off the detailed vein patterns in their wings. Scientists think Meganjura grew so huge because it didn't have much competition from vertebrates, and the air back then, during the Carboniferous period, had a lot more oxygen than it does today.
The Loch Ness Monster is actually not from Scotland. Turns out, this real-life creature lived in the freezing waters of Antarctica about 70 million years ago. In 2019, researchers discovered fossils of a huge, prehistoric marine reptile that looked a lot like what people described as Nessie. This beast was terrifying, measuring up to 36 feet long with a massive giraffe-like neck. It also weighed around 15 tons, which is about the size of 3 elephants. Next up on our list of huge animals is a penguin. I know penguins aren't exactly what you'd call big, but scientists have just found what they think might be the biggest penguin ever, the Kumimamu fordyce. It's believed that these giant birds were hanging around New Zealand about 55 million years ago, and they were huge, weighing over 330 pounds. That's about 5 times the size of the emperor penguins, which are considered the largest penguins alive today. Now, let's move on from massive creatures to something much smaller. Meet B. manfredschmidti, a great ape that lived around 12 million years ago in what is now Germany. This creature is very special, as it's the tiniest great ape ever discovered. And when I say tiny, I really mean it. These ancient animals only weighed about 22 pounds. They were basically no bigger than a super chunky cat. If you think small creatures aren't scary, wait until you meet the electric blue tarantula. This newly discovered species from Thailand's mangroves has an almost otherworldly electric blue color. Its vibrant hue doesn't come from pigment, it is actually caused by the unique structure of its hair, which reflects blue light, making it look like an extraterrestrial being. We're going even further now, diving into the freezing pitch-black depths. At around 2,000 feet deep in the Andaman Sea, scientists found a new species of ghost shark, which they named Chimera supape. Their appearance is straight out of a horror movie. They have sleek, pale bodies, frills that look like feathers, and large, creepy eyes. These ghost sharks aren't actually sharks, but they are related, having diverged from their cousins about 400 million years ago. The good news is they're not too scary since they're only a bit bigger than a shoebox. Just when you think we can't find stranger creatures, we come across this ancient amphibian from Brazil. Scientifically known as K. rosei. This newly discovered giant crocodile-like creature lived during the Triassic period, over 240 million years ago. At nearly 10 feet long, it had a powerful jaw, resembling the modern-day alligator. This beast was definitely a survivor since it adapted to the most severe conditions ever seen on the planet. Last year, scientists were tracking the dense Amazon rainforest at night when they found some quirky orange spiders that looked like they were wearing black boots. The team soon discovered it was a new type of giant crab spider. And no, they don't look like crabs at all. They only got their name because, while perched on plants, these spiders spread their legs out to the sides, just like crabs. Do you know that some new species are named after celebrities? Hollywood icon Harrison Ford now has his very own snake, for example. Discovered in Peru, T. Harrison Fordy honors the actor famous for his role as Indiana Jones, an archaeologist with a notorious fear of snakes. Unlike the film's menacing serpents, this new snake species is quite modest in size, measuring about 16 inches long. We also have the Rampholion princei, a small new species of pygmy chameleon from Tanzania that was named after US rapper and poet Prince Iya. He received this honor because of his work raising awareness about global environmental issues. Another celebrity namesake is DiCaprio's snail-eating snake, which hangs out in the shrubs of Panama's forests. This S. irmelindi caprioi is about 15 inches long and spends its nights on palm fronds looking for snails and slugs. Its round eyes look like glowing coals that can be a bit scary, but overall, the creature is super chill. Even when it feels threatened, it doesn't bite. It just coils up around its head and gives off a really bad smell. Now something a bit more sinister. Meet Venomius tomhardii. Does that name ring a bell? Exactly. This new species of spider was named after Tom Hardy's portrayal of the infamous Marvel character Venom. And all because the black spots on the spider's abdomen reminded researchers of the famous anti-hero. Most spiders of this species were found in Australia at night, sitting in their elaborate webs in forested areas near the coast. When disturbed, these creepy crawlers often hide in silk-lined hollows in tree branches. We've also got something for the Lord of the Rings fans. In the vast and warm waters of the Amazon River, scientists have just discovered a new species of pacu. This fish is a relative of the terrifying piranha, with a plant-based diet and human-like teeth. It was named Myloplus sauron because of a bold vertical black mark on its side, which reminded researchers of the fiery eye symbol of the villain Sauron from Tolkien's epic saga. Wait, is that a tanned capybara or a wild dog? Well, actually, it's neither. This is a newly discovered dwarf deer. This tiny creature, about the size of a basset hound, scurries through the forests of Peru. The combo of large eyes, stocky body, and short legs makes this animal simply adorable. This cute little deer is the complete opposite of what we've got coming up next. This bizarre-looking creature is what we believe the beast of 5 teeth might have looked like. Its fossils, found in Chile and Patagonia, showed that it lived during the age of dinosaurs, about 72 million years ago. This finding is just another piece of evidence that mammals had been roaming around that part of South America much earlier than we thought. Moving from the forests of South America to the deserts of Australia, we come across a sand dragon lizard, known scientifically as Cteniferus tayacalpa. With its sandy color and long, lean body, this lizard looks like it could star in a Dune movie. Discovered last year, this sand dragon lizard blends in perfectly with the hot sands of the Great Victoria Desert in southern Australia. For over 10 years, a large-eyed creature managed to hide from scientists who ventured into the mountains of southwestern China. But not this time. In 2023, the group finally managed to take photos of 7 frogs that didn't match any known species. They're now known as Leishan odorous frogs, a species that grows to be about 2 inches long and has small bumps all over their grass-green bodies. Off the coast of Chile, we have recently found a seamount nearly 4 times as high as the Burj Khalifa. Underwater mountains are usually home to beautiful life forms, like sponge gardens and ancient corals. But this Chilean seamount also hid a creature known as the flying spaghetti monster. It's a rare type of squid with long noodle-like tentacles that make it look like an underwater pasta dish. Including its tentacles, this strange creature can be over 130 feet long. Recently, scientists were diving into the cold waters of the Antarctic Peninsula when they thought they had found an ordinary dragonfish swimming by. But there was something unusual about this one. It turned out that this fish had 2 darker vertical stripes along its slender body. That's when they realized they were looking at a new species, the banded dragonfish. From bizarre sea creatures to a cute one. In 2017, locals were diving near Kume Island in Japan when they found the skeleton panda sea squirt. This deep-sea oddity quickly won people over with its look because its black spots actually resemble a panda bear's eyes and ears. At least if you have a good imagination. This unusual creature filters water to catch its food, and is yet another reminder of the ocean's hidden wonders.
In a frosty Canadian park, hidden deep beneath layers of thick ice, scientists discovered a bizarre skeleton they named the Frozen Dragon. The skeleton had been in the frozen ice for millions of years. It took experts decades to work out the species of this strange fossil. It was identified as a new genus of pterosaur. Pterosaurs were massive flying reptiles with wingspans of over 16 feet. Their heads were 3.5 times the size of their bodies. Pterosaurs lived 76 million years ago when they soared above the dinosaurs. Scientists described them as the biggest, meanest, and most bizarre animals that ever flew. The new genus has been named Cryodracon boreas, which translates to Frozen Dragon of the North Winds. In 2013, a young mountaineer was climbing one of the tallest mountains in Western Europe, Mont Blanc. He noticed a strange metal box poking out of the snow. The mountaineer pried the box open and found that it was filled with precious rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. The climber immediately handed the box to the authorities. It was discovered that the box likely belonged to a passenger on one of 2 flights from India that crashed into the mountain over 50 years ago. The box was valued to be worth over $200,000, and authorities are still searching for the heir to the small box of treasures. In northwest Siberia in 2007, a reindeer herder was on an outing with his sons when he noticed something strange in the ice. The man realized it was a frozen mammoth calf and immediately contacted the local museum. The calf was named Luba and was the best preserved mammoth mummy in the world at the time of its discovery. Luba had been in the ice for 41,800 years and is around 30 to 35 days old. From trunk to tail, the mammoth calf is roughly the same size as a large calf. If you're interested in seeing for yourself, Luba travels to museums all around the world. On the frozen continent of Antarctica, covered in layers of ice and snow, is Mount Erebus, the frozen volcano. The volcano was discovered in the middle of an eruption in 1841 by explorers on an Arctic expedition. The volcano is over 12,000 feet tall and has been active for the last 1.3 million years. Deep within the middle of the volcano is a huge crater filled with large volumes of molten lava. The volcano has occasional explosions, which means it's classified as being in continuing eruption. However, these eruptions are nothing to worry about because they're generally rather small. Back in 1991, 2 hikers were traveling across the Italian Alps when they stumbled across a body that they presumed to belong to a recently lost hiker. The duo trudged back down the mountain to report their unfortunate findings. Once the remains were recovered, it was clear that the body was not recent at all. Scientists determined that the Iceman was more than 5,000 years old and named him Otzi. The discovery was unlike anything scientists had ever before seen because the body was so well preserved. For years, Otzi was studied by scientists who discovered that our ancestors have a lot more in common with us than we ever knew before. Otzi was covered in ink body art. Research done on the contents of his stomach revealed that his last meal was dry cured meat, similar to the bacon we eat today. Otzi has at least 19 relatives living today, somewhere in Central Europe. Scientists were researching ancient squirrel burrows in Siberia when they came across something interesting. One of the squirrels had hidden away precious seeds deep beneath the ground. The seeds had been encased in ice for 32,000 years. The seeds were for the flower Silene stenophilia, which had long since gone extinct. Amazingly, scientists were able to recover plant tissue from inside the seeds and grow an entire crop of flowers. They've since reintroduced the previously extinct flower to natural habitats all across the world. In 1930, a team of Norwegian scientists sailed around the Arctic Ocean, conducting research on the seas and glaciers. They reached White Island, a dangerous and icy land no human had set foot on before, or so they thought. The scientists were shocked to discover the tip of a small boat sticking out of the snow. Frozen inside the boat, they found scientific equipment and various personal items, including a jacket monogrammed S.A. Undre. They had discovered the wreck of the famous Undre Arctic balloon expedition. In 1897, Swedish explorers, led by Undre, attempted to travel to the North Pole by hydrogen balloon. No one had ever heard from them ever again. People only found out what happened to them when the wreck was discovered 33 years later. It turns out that the balloon had crashed on White Island only 2 days after departing from Sweden. The explorers traveled along the island on a small makeshift boat, but were unable to make it any further. The best preserved woolly mammoth ever found was discovered in an area of permafrost in Siberia in 2010. Scientists named the frozen mammoth Yuka, after the small village near where it was found. Yuka had been frozen for 39,000 years and is thought to have been around 6 to 8 years old. Because Yuka is so well preserved, it has been studied for years and provided new information about mammoths. In 2019, scientists reported that they were able to activate cells taken from Yuka's tissue. Maybe one day we'll have woolly mammoths roaming the land. From looking at pictures and videos of Antarctica, the continent appears to be freezing cold, covered in snow, and flat, except for a few small hills. Scientists believe that too. When studying the Gomburtsev Mountains in the early 2000s, they were shocked to discover that the small rocky hills were actually the peak of a gigantic mountain formation under a mile of snow. Using radar technology, researchers worked out that the mountains are really around 10,000 feet tall and sprawl across 750 miles. This is around the same size as the European Alps, except hidden under tons of ice and snow. At a gold mine in Siberia, a businessman was examining a nearby river when he noticed something interesting in the frost. It was a small woolly rhino calf that was later named Sasha. The woolly rhino has been extinct for 15,000 years. It's thought that Sasha could have been frozen in the ice for up to 39,000 years. Sasha is unique because it's the only full-body woolly rhino to have ever been discovered. Glaciers around the northern Italian town of Pelo have begun to melt. Artifacts from decades and even centuries ago have been discovered pouring out of the ice. Personal belongings from soldiers have been found, things like diaries, photographs, and even love letters. Historians have even uncovered an entire cabin preserved beneath the ice. The cabin was filled with hard metal helmets and clothes. In 1845, Sir John Franklin embarked on an ill-fated expedition to the North Pole. The crew traveled on 2 ships, HMS Erebus and the ironically named HMS Terror. The expedition met with disaster, and both ships were lost to the icy waters. In 2016, the HMS Terror was discovered by a team of researchers. Despite being lost for 170 years, the freezing cold waters had maintained the ship in pristine condition. Scientists described the ship as frozen in time. Dinner plates and glasses were still on shelves, beds and desks were still in order, and even the passengers' luggage appeared to be in good condition. The HMS Erebus was also discovered nearby, but due to changing water conditions, the ship wasn't in great shape. The glacial ice surrounding a mountain passageway in Norway that was notoriously used by the Vikings has revealed hundreds of ancient artifacts. One of these artifacts was a giant unopened wooden box that was welded together. Researchers were beside themselves with anticipation, waiting to open this box. They believed it would be filled with Viking treasures or artifacts that would give us an insight into ancient society. When they opened the box, all that was inside was a plain old beeswax candle. It turns out that this box wasn't actually as old as they thought it was. By analyzing the candle, they discovered that the box dates back to the 17th century. The age of the Vikings had ended by the 11th century. It's likely that the candle box belonged to a farmer who was shipping it from his summer farm to his winter farm to light up the long nights.
Welcome to one of the most mysterious and unexplored places on Earth. But what's so special about that? It's just some icy peaks and the endless snowy expanse of Antarctica. Yeah, that's right. But there's still a planetary scale mystery here. No matter how hard you try, you won't see a hidden mountain range, giant, unexplored land where no human has ever set foot. And it lies under another layer of mountains. It's like a nesting doll, but the size of a continent. These mountains hide Antarctica secrets. And these secrets can tell us something awesome about the ancient history of our planet. This gigantic unexplored territory in Antarctica is called the Gambrintseva Subglacial Mountains. And the layer of ice above keeps this place untouched by nature and people. It's like a land inside another land, and it hides more than just mountains. There are valleys, hills, and plains. The whole area is similar to the European Alps, but unfortunately, we can't enjoy the view. Those mountains were first discovered in 1958 using seismological instruments. More than half a century has passed since then, and this place still remains one of the most poorly studied tectonic objects on Earth. Why? Because it's ice. A lot of ice. Who knows? Maybe there are some unknown ancient artifacts lying there. What if they're hiding a secret city or spaceships? It's unlikely, of course, but it would still be interesting to look there. Think about it. Hundreds or even thousands of miles of land that have remained unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. Even if no new species of animals or remains of an ancient civilization are there, this place still has a history. The history of the formation of continents on our planet. And scientists have already figured out some of this story. The mountains buried in Antarctica were originally like ordinary mountains, but as a result of a planetary scale event, they just... Wait a minute. Have you ever wondered how mountain ranges are formed? We see them in real life, in movies, in photos on the internet. We climb them. But how did they appear? Mountains have not always existed on the planet in this form. They appeared as a result of a large-scale collision of tectonic plates. Two giant solid chunks of ground are moving toward each other, then crash, and boom! Millions of tons of the Earth's crust pile on top of each other, mix, and form ledges and gorges. And all this can last for millions of years. Yes, it's a disaster, but it's very slow. Some tectonic plates are still colliding. For example, the Himalayas continue to grow because the Indian and Eurasian plates are still ramming into each other. And this process began about 50 million years ago. The Gambrintseva Mountains under ice experienced a similar event, only much earlier. An article in the journal Earth and Planetary Science Letters says that they appeared during the formation of the supercontinent Gondwana. Two giant pieces of land were separated by a boundless ocean. But then, about 700 million years ago, they collided and formed Gondwana. This supercontinent included the territories of modern Africa, South America, Australia, India, and Antarctica. The giant pieces crashed into each other and released a stream of hot, partially molten rock. This mess grew bigger and bigger, forming mountains. The temperature of those mountains grew, their mass increased, and at some point, Gondwana became unstable. The supercontinent began to collapse under its own weight. The hot rocks below the surface began to flow sideways as a result of a process called gravitational spreading. Take toothpaste and start squeezing it out of the tube. Approximately the same thing happened with billions of tons of red-hot rock. Ancient mountains in Antarctica appeared right during this catastrophic event. You've just watched a visual simulation of global events that took place hundreds of millions of years ago. It looks cool, but how did scientists figure it out? How did they see this planetary-scale destruction? If the Gambrintsef Mountains under ice is one of the most unexplored places in the world, then how could people find out its origin? The answer is simple. Tiny particles of rock have told us about the changing landscape of the planet. These are zircons, but scientists also call them time capsules. This mineral is very handy and resistant to mechanical and chemical influences. It's difficult to crush, it doesn't get affected by erosion, and it doesn't dissolve in water. And there's uranium inside it. This chemical element shows scientists the age of the rock. The fact is that uranium always decays into lead at the same rate. Scientists look at the ratio of uranium and lead and determine the age of minerals with great accuracy. Okay, this sounds a bit complicated. Here's a simple example. Imagine that each mountain belt is a clock that starts ticking at the moment of its formation. That is, after the collision of tectonic plates. After the rock forms, uranium begins its slow decay. The more time passes, the more uranium turns into lead. The rate of this decay is always the same. This decay can last for billions of years. The less uranium is in zircons and the more lead, the older the rock is. And this is how it happens in practice. Geologists take several rock samples. In a lab, they crush it to extract crystalline zircons. Geologists then dissolve the particles in acid to separate uranium from lead. Then they use a special device, a mass spectrometer that accelerates atoms and sorts them by mass. This is a rather complicated process, but the bottom line is that this device shows scientists the amount of uranium and lead. They look at the ratios of these two elements and calculate the age of the rock. Geologists took zircons from sandstones near the Gambrintsef Mountains, studied those particles, looked at the level of uranium, and calculated the chronology of mountain formation. Then they compared the data obtained with the history of our planet and realized that the mountains buried in Antarctica appeared during the formation of the supercontinent Gondwana. But how did they find out that the supercontinent included Australia, India, and Africa? Zirconia from those Antarctic rocks turned out to be very similar to zirconium from those countries. That is, a long time ago, these three continents were together. So, the Gambrintsef Mountains began to grow about 650 million years ago. About 580 million years ago, they reached the height of the Himalayas, and 80 million years later, they experienced the melting of the Earth's crust. And while most of the mountain ranges on the planet were changing and collapsing, the Gambrintsef Mountains under ice remained untouched. Water, soil, wind, earthquakes, gravity, and other natural forces destroy mountain belts. This process is called erosion. But mountains buried in Antarctica haven't experienced anything like this. The cold temperature and the ice sheet around them kept this range unchanged. It's one of the best preserved ancient mountain belts on the planet. Okay, but why do we need to explore these mountains? What difference does it make that the supercontinent Gondwana collapsed in the past? It's possible that plants, frozen bodies of insects, or ancient bacteria have remained preserved under thick layers of ice. What about ancient animals? Many species could have lived on Gondwana. Studying ancient mountains in Antarctica can show us what the planet looked like about 500 million years ago. When Antarctica was a green continent, what lived on it? What happened to this life? Is it possible to revive those ancient creatures after so many years? If scientists were able to calculate the date of the supercontinent's appearance using tiny particles, then imagine what they could find after examining this hidden mountain range. It all sounds very interesting. But there's one problem. To take a small piece of this unknown world, you need to drill through a lot of ice,
You need to deliver heavy equipment to one of the most inaccessible continents in the world, build stations, obtain an energy source, and conduct large-scale research. It sounds incredibly expensive, so this hidden territory will probably remain a mystery for a long time. Let's just hope that some billionaire will want to find out Antarctica's secrets and arrange a large-scale expedition there.
Okay, what if I tell you that the extraterrestrials we all imagine as little green men may actually look like very normal Earthlings and chill in Europe? This is the Iberian Peninsula, and people living there are under suspicion. Ooh. Here's the reason. Somehow, parts of the most important artifacts that the Iberian civilization called Treasure of Valena are made of metal that simply can't be found on Earth, because it's metal from a meteorite. Now let's tackle this step by step. This is the artifact itself, and it's composed of 59 different objects. Bowls, bottles, and bracelets. Is there a pattern there with all those bees? In total, the find weighs around 20 pounds, of which 18 pounds are 23.5 karat gold. Now, if you're not a metal specialist, I'll clarify it for you right away. For comparison, 23 karat gold is 95.8% pure gold, so 23.5 karat is even purer. The remaining percentage goes to other metals to help add strength and durability to the precious alloy. There was also silver, iron, and amber in that set. The artifact could have been pretty straightforward, but for these two, let's call them imposters. Look at this wrought iron bracelet and this hollow hemisphere. Can you see that? Those rusty lines on the hemisphere and the overall weird color of the bracelet do stand out, since everything else is made of purest gold. This all started back in 1963, when a researcher noticed a dark leaden metal among the shiny bowls and bottles. The metal was shiny in some areas and covered with a ferrous-looking oxide that was mostly cracked. Now, just so you understand, gold does not usually act this way. Gold is one of the least reactive of all metals, so it won't even tarnish, let alone rust. To figure out where this suspicious iron came from, researchers turned to mass spectrometry, which checks out the mass-to-charge ratio of molecules. Their findings showed that the nickel in the iron is similar to that found in meteoritic iron. Simply put, the bracelet and the hemisphere are of extraterrestrial origin. Ooh. Now, the exact age of the trove is hard to determine, yet it's crucial. We need to know the exact age to see if it coincides with the start of the Iron Age in the Iberian Peninsula. If it does, then no further questions here. But if it doesn't, well, it's, at the very least, weird, if not suspicious. So there's this three-age system. It comprises the Stone Age, then the Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age. The Stone Age is of no importance here, so let's compare the Bronze and the Iron Ages. The Bronze Age began when it was realized that combining copper and tin produced a material that was more durable than either metal alone. This era was all about major upgrades in tools and weapons, but two standout inventions were writing systems and the wheel. Then came the Iron Age. This time was all about slowly bringing iron into everyday life. Iron was way easier to shape into cool designs than bronze. Now, this was a big deal because iron, especially transformed into steel, provided significant improvements in all aspects of life. Tools became lighter, cheaper, and stronger compared to their bronze equivalents. You get it? Good. So, researchers have long debated whether the treasure dates back to the post-Argaric era or the latter part of the Bronze Age. The most recent study claims that those artifacts were created in 1400 to 1200 BCE, and something really doesn't add up. First off, the Iron Age began around 500 years after these artifacts were crafted. Plus, ancient craftsmen couldn't know back then how to work with metals that landed on Earth approximately 1 million years ago. And while the dates are really hard to explain, there is a logical explanation for the craftsmanship. The theory here is that those metal workers simply had access to the fallen meteorite, and thus, they could study it well and discover its properties before using it for decorative purposes. They could have figured it out through trial and error, and once they knew exactly how to work with this extraterrestrial metal, they proceeded to adorn the artifacts with it. Plus, there were the Phoenicians, who contributed to their craftsmanship. Now, it's true that the Iberian people have been processing metal and making pottery long before the Phoenicians settled on the peninsula. But the arrival of new metalworking techniques and the introduction of the potter's wheel enabled them to produce better quality goods much faster than before. So, we figured out the extraterrestrial origins of the Iberian artifacts. But guess what? This area is still under suspicion. The reason for that is the language they spoke. You see, for most modern languages people use today, there will always be some proto-language. Say for Italian, Spanish, and French, it's Latin, hence their similarities. But wait, Iberian was largely spoken where modern Spain is, so why isn't Spanish similar to it? Well, the truth is, no language today is similar to the Iberian. Maybe only the Basque language, but it's because of some similarities found in their numerical systems. Basque is classified as a language isolate, or simply unrelated to any other known languages, and the only language isolate in Europe. The Iberian language is unclassified. While the scripts written in it have been deciphered to various extents, the language itself remains largely unknown. And look at the alphabet the Iberians had. Looks like it doesn't really belong to our planet. But hold up, this one might be a bit of a stretch. When the Phoenicians came to the peninsula, they brought along their alphabet to the Iberians. But honestly, the Iberians probably weren't keen on just copying someone else's writing system, so they tweaked it until it looked completely different. Let's just say they took some inspiration and ran with it. While linguists can guess to some extent how most characters sounded, actually translating the language is still completely impossible. The Iberian language was non-Indo-European and faded away over 2,000 years ago. And there aren't any similar languages left to help us out. Super frustrating, right? Yeah. We got over 2,000 Iberian inscriptions from tombs, coins, potteries, lead plates, and even cave wall carvings. But aside from a handful of words, we're totally in the dark about what they mean. Now, if we could understand their language, we might have learned that they were great thinkers and all, but we can only contemplate the works of art they left. Iberian culture has a lot of amazing stuff made by talented artisans. We're talking about not just metalwork and ceramics, but also detailed sculptures, textiles, jewelry, and other personal bling. But here's the catch. Making all those luxury items depended a lot on a big farming class. At the heart of Iberian society, most folks were involved in farming and taking care of livestock. Depending on where you were, the types of farming varied. For example, up in the north, they were all about growing grains, while down in Valencia, they focused on producing olive oil and other agricultural aspects. In the west, raising animals was the name of the game. Still, we don't have much information about the day-to-day lives of the many people doing this essential work. Yet, on the flip side, we know a lot about the upper class of Iberian society, who control these agricultural resources and hire the artisans. By the 7th century BCE, we start to see a group of Iberian princes who were living the good life, trading with the Phoenicians, and enjoying fancy luxury items. You can spot this elite class in their burial practices. Cremation was the go-to method for funerals among the Iberians, and wealthy individuals were often found in cemeteries with all sorts of lavish goods and funerary sculptures that give us a peek into the fashion and hairstyles of the rich. Interestingly, starting in the 6th century BCE, there was a noticeable drop in the number of recognizable burials, which suggests that these elaborate funeral customs became more exclusive to a small elite. Meanwhile, the fate of the majority, farmers, artisans, soldiers, and laborers, who made up a big chunk of the population, remains a bit of a mystery. It used to be a pretty advanced civilization, but it vanished without a trace. Researchers think it could have been due to some massive earthquake. But so far, we don't know for sure. In 2011, scientists from Chile found a weird-looking fossil in Antarctica that looked like a squashed football. Almost 10 years later, the rock just sat on a shelf in Chile's National Museum of Natural History with no specific label. It went by The Thing in the museum because it looked like something from a science fiction movie. When the scientists finally got their hands on the strange fossil, it turned out it was actually a giant softshell egg from around 66 million years ago. This one is more than 11 inches long and 7 inches wide. A regular chicken egg is just 2.5 inches long, and an ostrich egg is almost 6 inches long for comparison. So, The Thing won the title of the biggest softshell egg ever found and the second largest egg of any animal we know of. The only bigger egg that was ever found was that of the extinct Madagascan elephant bird, which is also 1.5 times as tall as Michael Jordan. The bird, not the egg. The Antarctic egg is also special because it's the first fossil ever found in this part of the world. So, whoever left it there must have been one big creature, probably a giant sea turtle that lived long ago, like a mosasaur. This is surprising because most scientists thought these creatures didn't even lay eggs, so this discovery could change what we know about them. The egg is also unique because it has a thin eggshell and no pores, which is totally different from most dinosaur eggs. It actually looks more like the eggs of lizards and snakes, but it came from a giant creature related to these animals. No known dinosaurs or flying reptiles from that time and place were big enough to lay such a huge egg, so it must have been a mosasaur after all. But we can't be 100% sure. Scientists did a lot of work and studied 259 types of living reptiles, like lizards and snakes, and their eggs. From this, they figured out that the mommy who laid the egg was probably at least 23 feet long, not counting her tail. During the late Cretaceous period, this part of Antarctica might have been like a nursery. Paleontologists have found bones of tiny mosasaurs and plesiosaurs in the same area, along with bones from the grown-up ones. Archaeologists in Norway made another cool but literally discovery and found dozens of arrows that had been hidden in ice for 6,000 years. They were melting out of a large ice patch in the high mountains, covering an area of about 45 football fields. In 2014 and 2016, when the summers were extra warm, scientists went to an ice patch called Langfoni to look around. They also found lots of reindeer bones and antlers there. Some of the arrows were whole and some in pieces, along with 5 arrowheads around the melting ice patch. This is more arrows than have been found at any other frozen site in the world. Some of the 68 found arrows date back to the Neolithic period, and the newest ones are from the 14th century of the Common Era. Ice is like the perfect time machine that can preserve whatever ends up there in an almost perfect condition. Langfoni became famous as one of the first ice patch sites after a local hiker found a 3,300-year-old leather shoe right next to its edge. Scientists are studying places like this to understand how people use these sites and how the ice patches from Norway to North America changed over time. Now, once upon a time, around 32,000 years ago, to be exact, a squirrel buried some seeds near a river in Siberia. Am I the only one getting the Ice Age vibes? Anyway, these seeds belong to a plant with cute white flowers. Thousands of years later, a group of scientists found these seeds buried deep in the frozen ground, about as far down as a 12-story building is tall. The seeds were surrounded by ice and bones of animals, like mammoths, bison, and woolly rhinoceroses. The mature seeds had been damaged, maybe by some squirrel, but some of the younger seeds still had good plant parts inside them. The scientists carefully took those out and put them in small containers to help them grow. And here comes the coolest part. They were able to grow the plants. Their flowers were shaped a little differently from the flowers of the same plant that grows today. After a year, the Ice Age plant even made new seeds. Based on this, the scientists suggested that permafrost could be a depository for an ancient gene pool, and we could find extinct species there and bring them back to life. Scientists on an icebreaker in Antarctica were looking for whales but found something way more unusual. The camera behind the ship, which is as heavy as a car, detected 16 million icefish nests on the floor of the Weddell Sea. The nests were located about every 10 inches in all directions and covered an area of 93 square miles, which is slightly bigger than the whole of Washington, D.C. The colony even had a distinct border, which was a line in the sand. The scientists were in the area because they were studying a special spot in the ocean where the water was a little warmer than the water around it. In this warmer water, they found tiny animals called zooplankton near the top. When the young icefish hatch, they swim up to this area to eat the zooplankton before going back down to the seafloor to grow up and have their own offspring. Since there was so much food, it made sense to see icefish in this warm water. But they didn't expect to find such a huge number of icefish nests, much more than anyone had ever seen before. New Zealand's Antarctic Heritage Fund found some old photo negatives in a hut in Antarctica. They turned out to be unique images from the Ross Sea Party. It was a famous failed expedition led by Ernest Shackleton. He wanted to become the first person to cross Antarctica by land, from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea, passing through the South Pole. But things went wrong when their ship, the Aurora, was blown out to sea. They had to use the hut from another explorer, Captain Robert Falcon Scott. His goal was to be the first person to reach the North Pole, but sadly, he didn't succeed either. The negatives were made of cellulose nitrate and were found stuck together in the small box. The Trust took the negatives back to New Zealand, where they carefully separated them and discovered 22 hidden images. Many of the photos were damaged, but the Trust could still recognize some familiar places around McMurdo Sound, a well-known area in Antarctica. No one knows for sure who took the pictures. In December 2021, some scientists noticed a strange mark on the Larsen Ice Shelf, a giant sheet of ice off the eastern coast of Antarctica. They thought it might be a river flowing under the ice, so they drilled down over 1,600 feet to check it out. They expected to find water, but they didn't expect to see that the water was full of fast-moving creatures called amphipods. The scientists also found that the water in the underground river had unusual layers of currents moving in different directions, which they still don't fully understand. Another surprising thing happened during their research. On December 20th of the same year, a volcano erupted far away in Tonga, and the pressure waves from the eruption were detected all the way down in the ice river in Antarctica. It shows how everything on our planet is connected, even in the most distant places.
This is a real human brain. Well, it was, until a hot cloud of ash turned it into glass. This crazy transformation happened almost 2,000 years ago, when Mount Vesuvius decided it was a good day to erupt and destroy cities like Pompeii, Atlantis, and Herculaneum. This particular brain belonged to a young man who lived in 79 CE in Herculaneum. Not the most famous Roman town, but it was the first place that was discovered under Vesuvius's ashes way back in 1709. Around 200 years later, archaeologists found the remains of this young man lying face down on a bed. All the smoke and ash probably made him disoriented, so while most of the citizens of Herculaneum rushed to the shore, hoping to be rescued, the brain guy ended up trapped inside a building and passed out. Weirdly enough, this saved his brain from completely disappearing. How in the world does a brain turn into glass? Well, when Mount Vesuvius erupted, it didn't expel just lava. It also sent away a really hot cloud of ash before the solidified lava could flow down. This type of lava, known as pyroclastic flow, could get as hot as 869 degrees Fahrenheit. An insane temperature, we know. Hot enough to melt your brain, but not hot enough to turn it into glass. The cloud of ash, however, can reach temperatures between 932 degrees Fahrenheit to 1,112 degrees Fahrenheit. But to turn something into glass, you don't just need heat, you need rapid cooling too. To put it simply, you have to heat something to a very high temperature until it melts into a liquid. If you let it cool down slowly, the molecules of this liquid will start to calmly organize themselves in the shape of crystals. But if this something cools down super fast, it will solidify in whatever shape the liquid was. It's like making ice cubes. If you pour water into a tray and stick it in the freezer, it will turn into ice because it cools down quickly. But if you leave the water out at room temperature, it'll just evaporate. This means that the brain melted due to a really high temperature, but before it could crystallize, for example, or just boil away, it got really cold. The flow from the eruption was not hot enough for this to happen, but the cloud of ash that reached town before the pyroclastic flow was hot enough to start this process, and fast enough to leave just at the right time. To figure out the exact temperature needed for this brain-to-glass transformation, scientists used a technique called differential scanning calorimetry. This fancy name basically means that they heat up glass shards to see when they start to change shape. They discovered that the cloud of ash had to be exactly 950 degrees Fahrenheit hot for the brain cells to start melting. Now, remember how I said this guy was inside a building, but most of the citizens were outside? Well, those people were also exposed to this drastic change in temperature, but they didn't turn into glass because they were not being protected by the walls of a building. The protection provided by the skull surely helped our guy, but it was not enough. And since other people didn't have the same protection, their brains basically poofed. And before you ask, no other parts of his body turned into glass. You see, you need some liquid for the glass-making process to happen. The brain has a lot of water and fat, which makes it a prime candidate for the glassification process. Yes, I've just made that word up. Other organs might have contained liquid, but they weren't as protected as the brain, so they were destroyed by the heat. And bones? Well, bones don't have enough liquid, so they just remained the same. The ones that didn't char, anyway. When the brain turned into glass, it looked a lot like an obsidian stone, a type of volcanic glass formed by the cool lava of a volcano. Even the forensic archaeologist who discovered this glassified brain thought it was just a stone at first. He was studying the bones of our hero when he noticed something shining inside of his skull, right in the middle of all the volcanic ash that filled it. To his surprise, this thing was way more fragile than obsidian and smaller too, with some fragments being only a few millimeters large. He only figured this was part of that guy's brain after he took the glass to the lab. With the help of a microscope, he discovered that this was not a stone but an organic tissue, which is basically cells that form our organs. This organic tissue was made by protein, a molecule produced by living things like animals and plants. And this was not just any protein. This one was specific to the human brain because every organ is made of different types of protein. The researchers also found nerve cells preserved inside this glass, complete with the tendrils that help them receive and send messages. The microscope also showed what was left of myelin, a fatty substance that gives a speed boost to the messages traveling along the nerves. This isn't the first time scientists discovered preserved human brains. In fact, more than 4,000 brains have been found since the 17th century. It may not look like a big number, but keep in mind that finding only the brain preserved in a skeleton while the other organs are gone is not that common. You see, the human brain is actually the first thing that decomposes when we're 6 feet under, and it usually turns into liquid. When scientists stumble upon a human brain, it's usually dried, frozen, or literally turned into soap. A brain can be dehydrated if a person perishes in a place that is very hot, like a desert. Frozen brains are found, obviously, in places that are super cold, like polar tundras. A brain turned into soap may sound weird, but the saponification process is not that rare. You need a lot of fat and oils to make soap, and the human brain is filled with this. It's a complex process, but if you find a brain that turned into soap, it must have been buried in a place that is very wet and has little oxygen. Back in 1982, for example, construction workers found dozens of human skeletons in a pond in Florida. They were all 8,000 years old, and 91 of them actually had their brains still somewhat intact. And by intact, I mean they turned into jelly soap. During the 2000s, the brains of 45 people were found in Spain, preserved because of this saponification process. This discovery helped researchers understand the chemical composition of the brains and even the weather conditions of the moment when these people passed away. Scientists also discovered two 3,700-year-old brains in Turkey that belonged to a middle-aged man and a teenager that were trying to escape an attack on their city. This time, the brains turned into charcoal because of a super hot fire. And even though their skulls preserved the brains in this state, the heating and cooling process was probably not intense enough to glassify them. But this? It's the first time in history that scientists have found a brain that naturally turned into glass. It's like finding a unicorn, but in a more scientific way. So what does this discovery mean? Well, for starters, it gives us a glimpse into the lives of those who existed such a long time ago. Secondly, it taught scientists an amazing way to preserve the human brain. It also shows just how powerful nature can be. Powerful enough to turn a brain into glass, but delicate enough to preserve it for thousands of years. So, let's give a shout out to the young man who unknowingly contributed to science. He probably had no idea that his brain would one day be the star of a groundbreaking discovery. His tragic end has given us a fascinating peek into the past.
A giant wormhole, or simply said, a connection between regions of space-time, opens up in space near Earth. Our world faces chaos unlike anything before. Satellites incinerated, skies ripped open by radiation storms, entire power grids blacked out. The atmosphere is swelling and scorching, the oceans are boiling, the magnetic shield is shattering. Suddenly, the wormhole destabilizes. Space-time starts to unravel, tearing Earth apart from the inside out. People are seeking shelter, but nothing can save them anymore. Look at this devastation. This isn't just a sci-fi scenario. It's a cosmic apocalypse waiting to happen and rewrite the fate of humanity. The thing is, some black holes might actually be secret space portals. It may sound like something straight out of Stranger Things, but it's not. Scientists have been wondering for years if some black holes could actually be wormholes in disguise, tunnels through space and time. And now, a new study says this might actually be possible, at least in theory. Wormholes are like cosmic shortcuts that let you pop out in a totally different part of the universe. Unfortunately, we've never found one, and the whole concept still lives in the land of what if. Here's the problem. To actually make a wormhole work, you'd need something called negative energy. That's not just rare. It doesn't even exist in the regular universe. Maybe in some weird world of quantum physics, but even there, it's super uncertain. Still, scientists have a wild thought. What if some black holes aren't just giant space vacuums that swallow everything around them, but are really hidden wormholes? The odds of that are tiny, like winning the lottery while getting struck by lightning and discovering extraterrestrials at the same time. But mathematically, it's not impossible. That's where the new study comes in. Researchers looked at a weird type of black hole called a Schwarzschild black hole. These ones don't spin, don't have electric charge, and, very predictably, are totally hypothetical. They're just the math version of a black hole, not something we've seen in space. In any case, the team studied something called quasi-normal modes, which is just a fancy way of saying how space vibrates around a black hole when you mess with it. These vibrations don't go on forever. They fade out like the ringing sound you get when you hit a bell. By analyzing those space-time vibes, scientists tried to figure out if they could tell the difference between a regular black hole and a wormhole pretending to be one. It turns out that it's super hard to tell this difference. But maybe that's the point. Wormholes might be hiding in plain sight, wearing black hole costumes like it's space Halloween. Wormholes could copy a black hole's behavior almost perfectly, at least on paper. The researchers uploaded the whole study to Arxiv, which is where science nerds drop their ideas before they hit the big journals, and it's already been published in Physical Review D, which is a serious physics magazine. The coolest thing, though, is that it isn't a brand new idea. Scientists have been debating this whole black hole or wormhole thing for decades. Back in 2021, some researchers wondered if the giant black holes at the centers of galaxies, called active galactic nuclei, were actually wormhole entrances. And in 2022, a team in Bulgaria said that the light coming from a wormhole could look almost exactly like what comes from a black hole. There's also this sci-fi level theory that some black holes might be paired with opposite twins, called white holes. A white hole basically spits stuff out instead of sucking it in. Together, a black and a white hole could form a wormhole tunnel. But no one's found a white hole either yet, so that idea is still just theory. By the way, in this latest study, the authors have shown that wormholes and black holes not only look similar, but also sound similar, at least in how space-time shakes around them when they get hit with something. So our next move should be fine-tuning our scientific models, especially near the part of the wormhole called the throat. Scientists want to see if wormholes could fake even more black hole-like behavior, but it's tricky. Some of the math gets super hard. In any case, how about finding out more about these mysterious wormholes? You've seen them in every second sci-fi movie, magical space tunnels that let you skip across the universe. Einstein was the first one to have dreamed them up. Wormholes are still 100% hypothetical, and we've never spotted one. But that doesn't stop people from theorizing. Like, what if a wormhole started sucking in matter like a black hole does? If a wormhole started eating stuff like dust, gas, or space debris, it would create a plasma tornado, a literal space firestorm in its throat. And this twisty storm would eventually blast out the other side of the wormhole, firing hot plasma at nearly 125 million miles per hour. That's about 1/5 the speed of light. It would also be insanely hot in there, so hot it could probably trigger nuclear fusion. Of course, all of this is still just theoretical. No one's seen a wormhole do this. No one's seen a wormhole do anything, actually. But the math says it could happen, if we ever find a wormhole. The bright side of it all is that we would probably spot an event with so much drama. Even though wormholes don't have an event horizon, aka the point of no return, like black holes, they still bend light. Normally, you might not be able to see something like that, but this thing is so absurdly bright from the plasma firestorm that you would actually see it glowing in space. Think of it like a black hole, but with a glowing center instead of just darkness, and a jet of flaming plasma shooting out one side like a broken space faucet. Still, don't get your hopes up for spotting one anytime soon. Even if we did find a wormhole, it probably wouldn't last long. It could break apart or transform into a completely different type of space-time before we even realized what we were looking at. Plus, keep in mind that wormholes might look almost exactly like black holes unless you know what kind of light polarization, how light waves line up, to look for. Now let's talk a bit more about black holes themselves. You're likely to know them as insane space beasts that suck up everything nearby, gas, dust, even light. And once something crosses a black hole's event horizon, it's trapped forever. Scientists say that inside, everything gets crushed into a tiny point called a singularity, where the usual rules of physics totally break down. But back in 2010, a physicist named Nikodem Pavlovsky had a crazy idea. What if black holes don't have singularities? Instead, what if the center of a black hole is actually a doorway to another universe? Maybe our entire universe was born from matter shooting out of a black hole in some parent universe. Pavlovsky's theory uses something called torsion, which is like a weird gravitational twist that stops matter from getting crushed infinitely. Because of torsion, instead of crashing into a singularity, matter inside a black hole can create a tunnel, a so-called Einstein-Rosen bridge, or simply a wormhole, connecting a black hole to a white hole. So, imagine matter falling into a black hole in one universe, then popping out of a white hole in another. Poplavsky thinks this could explain the Big Bang, but as a big bounce, meaning the universe keeps cycling through phases of expansion and contraction, not just one huge explosion. Sadly, if such a tunnel existed, it would be a one-way trip. Nothing would come back through to the original universe. Some scientists are still skeptical because torsion hasn't been proven yet, but other experts think Poplavsky's model is super promising. They even go further and say that our whole universe might be living inside a giant black hole hundreds of billions of light years wide. Now, we just need to figure out how to test this. Future space studies might give us more clues, like checking if our universe is closed, which basically means that it's curved without an edge, or digging deeper into cosmic background radiation, which is the leftover glow from the Big Bang.
There's something curious about Scotland when seen from above. An almost perfectly straight line cuts right across the country from coast to coast. You might have never noticed, but that giant scar has existed for hundreds of millions of years. And right along its path lies one of Earth's biggest mysteries, the Loch Ness Monster. Meet the Great Glen Fault. Just like other major fault zones around the world, it was born because of the movement of Earth's tectonic plates. So let's go back in time, like 430 million years ago. At that point, a massive geological drama was going on called the Caledonian Orogeny. Now, orogeny is just a fancy scientific word for how mountains are formed. So, this whole region looked totally different back then. There were these three ancient continents called Laurentia, Baltica, and Avalonia. Think of them like, giant puzzle pieces slowly floating around on Earth's surface. Over millions of years, these enormous chunks of land drifted and eventually smashed into each other. When they collided, the edges of the continents crumpled and folded, kind of like a piece of paper bunching up when you push it from both sides. But some scientists believe the continents didn't just crash straight into each other. Instead, they started sliding sideways past one another. Imagine pressing your fingertips together and rubbing your hands back and forth. That sideways motion is what scientists call a strike-slip fault. What I mean is, these massive blocks of rock move side to side rather than up and down. So, bit by bit, the land on either side of the fault kept inching past each other, shifting by several miles over geologic time. During the late Cretaceous to early Tertiary, which happened roughly 66 million years ago, the region shifted once again. This time, scientists believe the land's displacement was about 64 miles. Then, the Ice Ages came along. Rivers and glaciers found that giant crack in the Earth and dug it out even more, making it deeper and wider. That's how they carved out the lakes that follow the fault's path. Finally, dump all of that into a geological blender, and there you have it, the Great Glen Fault in all of its majestic glory today. Yep, all that movement of the land helped sculpt the mountains and deep valleys that shape the highlands as we see now. Now, the interesting thing is, the story of the Great Glen Fault doesn't stop in Scotland. This scar in Earth's crust actually has a secret twin across the ocean. The fault probably continues on the other side of the North Atlantic, over in North America. But over there, it's no longer one continuous crack. About 200 million years ago, Earth decided to shake things up. That's when the Mid-Atlantic Ridge began forming, basically a giant underwater mountain range that started pushing the continents apart and broke the original fault. So now, the North American side of the Great Glen Fault shows up as what is now called the Cabot Fault, also known as the Long Range Fault. It slices through the length of northwestern Newfoundland in Canada and even stretches out into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Meanwhile, back in Scotland, the fault lines up perfectly with the Great Glen, a valley about 62 miles long, stretching from Inverness in the northeast all the way to Fort William. And it's filled with gorgeous lochs. One of the largest and most famous of these lochs, of course, is Loch Ness. Yes, I'm talking about the Loch Ness, that mysterious stretch of water that's said to be home to the Loch Ness Monster. You know, the legendary creature with the long neck that likes to poke out of the water every now and then, and that sends shivers down the spines of anyone lucky or unlucky enough to catch a glimpse. At least, that's what people say. But despite many years of searching for the creature, everything from thermal imaging drones to miniature submarines, no one has found any real evidence of the monster. And one interesting fact is that the Loch Ness Monster might be directly linked to the Great Glen Fault. Some geologists think that plenty of Nessie sightings might actually be, well, just simple bubbles, big ones, and they were probably caused by the fault itself. The thing is, all the movement in this region hasn't been confined to millions of years ago. Over the past 150 years or so, there have been occasional moderate earthquakes rumbling through the highlands. When the fault lines shift, even just a tiny bit, they can release gas pockets trapped underground. Then, rising gas bubbles can disturb the surface of a lake, creating ripples, waves, or sudden bursts of movement across the water. And that's exactly the kind of thing that might look to someone standing on the shore like a giant creature swimming just beneath the surface. But in reality, it could simply be the Earth shifting by a fraction of an inch along that ancient fault. Or, as I like to put it, the lake has farted. Big question, is this region still moving? I mean, is this big geological map actually getting bigger nowadays? Well, it's hard to say, because scientists don't all agree. Some researchers think the Great Glen Fault is still active today. They consider it a reactivated strike-slip fault, meaning there might still be some action happening deep underground. The rocks on either side might still be straining and inching past each other. And in fact, occasional moderate tremors have been recorded over the past 150 years, usually with magnitudes of around 3 or 4. But not everyone is convinced. Other scientists point out that there is no solid evidence of significant modern activity along the main fault. And the seismic activity over the past few centuries hasn't been strong enough to prove the fault is seriously on the move. Take the Inverness earthquake that happened in 1901, for instance. To this day, it's considered one of the strongest that ever happened in Scotland. People felt it all across the country, and the earthquake damaged several buildings in Inverness. The situation was so intense that it gave the feeling of, oh boy, this crack is definitely growing. But the specialists aren't so convinced. Some believe it likely happened on a secondary fault connected to the Great Glen Fault, but not directly on the main fault itself. So, once again, it's hard to say for sure whether the Great Glen Fault is still actively moving today. Despite all the different studies and debates over many years, there are only a few conclusions about this huge gap that everyone agrees on. The fault is unusually straight, it is super ancient, and it is extremely deep by any standards. That's not the only cool fact about Scotland's territory, though. Let's travel to the islands that lie off the northwest coast of the mainland, to the Isle of Skye. This place was once home to a wide variety of dinosaurs during the Middle Jurassic period. The thing is, finding dinosaur fossils from this time period is super rare, but the Isle of Skye is an exception. Specialists discovered that about 167 million years ago, give or take, dinosaurs were mingling on the muddy edges of a warm lagoon over there. As they gathered around this ancient watering hole, they left behind layers of overlapping footprints. Specialists first noticed these tracks in the early 1890s, but at the time, they concluded that the impressions were petrified burrows of ancient fish. But then, in 2019, a graduate student from the University of Edinburgh went there and figured, nah, these are definitely three-toed dinosaur footprints. And he was right. Over several years of fieldwork, he and his colleagues discovered more than 130 individual prints. The team believes that the tracks were left by megalosaurs. These were large dinosaurs, around 20 feet long, and they were serious meat-eaters. In fact, they sat right at the top of the local food chain during the Middle Jurassic. But at the time those footprints were made, these big boys probably weren't hunting prey. No, their tracks show that they were just walking around, wandering in different directions, probably hanging out near the water. And this spot is so special because it gives us a rare peek into what life was like in the Jurassic period.
You type Tonga Cliff Mystery into Google and this pops up. A rock. Yep, just a rock. At least at first glance. But it gets weird once you realize this is actually a 2-story tall boulder perched on top of a 120-foot high cliff in Tonga. And it's chilling there, at a whopping 128 feet above sea level. So, how the heck did this rock get there? First, a proper introduction. This is Makalahi, which means big rock in Tongan. This name hits the nail on the head because this baby stands at about 22 feet tall. That's taller than a giraffe standing on its tiptoes. And it weighs over 1,300 tons. And that's like stacking nearly 325 elephants on a giant scale. With those massive measurements, it makes total sense that the locals call it Makalahi. But from now on, we can also think of it as the giant tsunami rock. And to understand why, I've got to tell you the story of Makalahi in Tonga. In 2024, researchers from the University of Queensland's School of the Environment were exploring the southern side of Tongatapu Island. One day, they were chatting with a group of local farmers who mentioned a strange and massive rock sitting up on a cliff. And they were honestly pretty surprised. After all, it didn't make any sense for such a huge boulder to be located that far inland, especially since it's sitting about 656 feet away from the edge of the cliff. On top of that, it was covered in vegetation and surrounded by overgrowth, which suggests it's been sitting there for a long, long time. That's when they started asking themselves the big question: where did this rock even come from? So to figure it out, the team created a 3-dimensional model of the boulder and headed to the coast. After some careful research, they finally found the spot where the boulder could have originated. Turns out it broke off from a cliff more than 90 feet above sea level. Alright, so they found the source, but let's take a moment to recap what we know so far. The rock originally came from a spot about 98 feet above sea level, and now it's sitting at 128 feet above sea level. That's a pretty big jump. Sure, it's not like climbing Mount Everest or anything, but come on, it's a rock. It didn't just grab some gear and climb up there by itself. That brings us back to the big question. How did this massive boulder get up there? Well, it was probably moved by a tsunami. Yep, this rock could actually be solid ancient evidence of a tsunami. You see, we're talking about Tonga, an island country in Polynesia, part of Oceania. It's made up of nearly 170 islands with about 36 of them inhabited. The country is divided into 3 main island groups: the Vava'u, Ha'api, and Tongatapu archipelagos. The entire region sits right at the junction of 2 major tectonic plates, the Indo-Australian plate to the west and the Pacific plate to the east. It's part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, that giant horseshoe-shaped zone that wraps around the ocean basin. And if there's one thing we know about the Ring of Fire, is that it's packed with intense geological activity. With lots of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions happening all the time, and those events can absolutely trigger catastrophic tsunamis. Tonga is no exception. According to Dr. Annie Lau, a coastal geomorphologist who took part in the study, Tonga has a long history of tsunamis for exactly that reason. Take the tsunami that hit the country at the beginning of 2022, for example. That catastrophic event produced waves as high as 66 feet, with water pushing nearly 0.62 miles inland. It was so powerful that, tragically, it claimed the lives of at least 6 people, and it was actually triggered by a volcanic eruption. So yeah, tsunamis are pretty common in Tonga, thanks to all that magma and tectonic activity constantly happening beneath the surface. And a massive, powerful wave is likely what carried Makalahi up onto the cliff. According to the study, this event may have happened around 7,000 years ago. That's even older than the first human settlement in Tonga, which is believed to have occurred roughly 3,000 years ago. Interestingly, that estimated timeline lines up with evidence of a massive tsunami that hit New Zealand's North Island.
around 1,300 miles southwest of Tonga. The researchers had a theory. Now all they had to do was run the numbers to see if it was actually possible. So they measured the boulder's size and weight, then used that data to model how big a wave would have to be to push such a massive rock that far inland. Their findings suggest the boulder may have originally sat near the edge of a cliff, but was shoved inland by a tsunami. The wave lasted about 90 seconds and reached up to 164 feet in height. That's almost as tall as Niagara Falls. Just to give you a perspective, that's significantly larger than the waves recorded during the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004 or the Tohoku tsunami in 2011. Now, here's the thing. These tsunamis were triggered by earthquakes, and waves caused by earthquakes usually top out at just a few tens of feet. So, in Makalahi's case, it probably wasn't an earthquake that did the job. Instead, it's possible the wave came from a landslide tsunami. This theory suggests that the earthquake not only generated a tsunami that flooded the island, but it probably also triggered a massive landslide. When a huge chunk of material suddenly slides into the ocean or something shifts quickly underwater, it can create a landslide-triggered tsunami, and that landslide, in turn, may have produced a second tsunami. One powerful enough to carry Makalahi and drop it where it still sits today. Now, while science may have found a likely explanation for how the rock got to such a strange location, many locals will probably continue to pass down the traditional stories tied to rocks like this one. According to Polynesian mythology, coastal boulders like Makalahi were placed by the legendary hero Maui. In some legends, Maui used a giant boulder and a magical rope made from the hair of the deity Hina to anchor the sun and slow it down. Another story is known as the Maui Throwing Stones. It refers to a group of 8 coral limestone boulders located in the village of Havelukilu on Tongatapu. The myth mentions that these massive stones were thrown to Havelukilu by Maui from the neighboring island of Eua. The story goes that Maui was annoyed by a rooster that woke him up every morning, so he picked up stones and hurled them at the bird. And that's how the rocks from Eua ended up in Tongatapu. Now here's the interesting part. The term white chicken in Tongan also means foaming waves, so some believe this story may actually be a metaphor for a tsunami. Even though these myths don't mention Makalahi directly, they show how important rocks like these are to local people. Now, we can say that this archaeological evidence is not only important for culture, but also for science. The recent study gives us some fascinating theories about how the rock ended up so high up and so far inland. But researchers still need to find what's called a landslide scar to prove their point and fully solve the Tonga Cliff mystery. Follow-up research is crucial because it will help us to uncover what triggers these kinds of events and how often that might happen. And who knows? One day we might come across new cases of giant rocks moved by giant tsunamis, each one carrying its own story from the deep. Dinosaurs, big ancient bugs, creepy spiders, and scary insects are all cute animals compared to the monsters that lived on Earth about 500 million years ago. For example, here's a creature that swam in the water like a stingray and had 3 eyes. Its mouth was like a pencil sharpener. 2 long claws with forked tips like pincers protruded from its head, and its gills were somewhere in the back. This is not a thing from a sci-fi movie. This is Mosura. Its remains are preserved in excellent condition. Let's look at it more closely and study other similar monsters. The Cambrian Explosion. Remember this name. This period is also called the Biological Big Bang, the time when a huge number of different living creatures began to appear in the ocean, large, small, and tiny. The ancestors of almost all modern animal groups were most likely born during the Cambrian Explosion, which lasted from 541 to 485 million years ago. It was a time when the first truly effective and terrifying predators appeared on Earth. One of them was Mosura. It's only the size of an index finger, but you would never want to meet such a creature while swimming in the sea. It's scary to imagine what it could do with its pencil sharpener-shaped mouth. And you probably wouldn't be able to hide from it because, come on, it had 2 eyes on the sides and 1 big eye on its forehead. Mosura belonged to a group of arthropods. Scientists called it a sea moth since it reminded them of a moth. This thing used a flap-like apparatus similar to wings to float in the water like a stingray. This monster was quite creepy, but its appearance may seem familiar because it's a distant relative of modern spiders, crabs, centipedes, and moths. Scientists found several 506 million-year-old Mosura fossils, but unlike many other similar finds, these ones have been preserved in excellent condition. The found fossils showed sharp claws, a toothy jaw, and large gills in the tail section. Some parts of the fossil were so clear that they revealed the details of the creature's internal anatomy, including parts of its nervous and circulatory systems and digestive tract. It had jointed limbs like those of modern insects and crustaceans. When this monster swam in the sea, it probably grabbed its prey with long spiked claws sticking out of its head. Many Mosura relatives have claws covered with multiple spikes, which help them grab food. But that ancient creature had smooth claws forked at the tips. That is, it grabbed the prey with those tongs, using them like chopsticks, and then brought it to its mouth. Of course, this is an assumption, and nobody saw how this creature actually did it. Unlike many other similar animals, Mosura's posterior segmented body was studded with gills. Scientists don't know why this was necessary, but they assume that such an unusual breathing system helped to adapt to an environment with low oxygen content. Perhaps Mosura led a very active reproductive lifestyle that required high oxygen consumption. Creepy, dangerous, and reproducing fast. An excellent set of qualities for one of the most dangerous predators of antiquity. But what did Mosura eat? It probably caught different types of worms and small arthropods. It's nice to think that this monster lived so long ago and was so small. But what if this creature was the size of a shark and was swimming in the ocean these days? Perhaps it would become a dominant dweller and people would swim much less along the coast. Mosura lived in the water but was discovered in the Burgess Shale Rock Formation in the Canadian Rockies. Many mountains on Earth were once the seabed inhabited by strange creatures. One of them was Opabinia. It had 5 eyes, a mouth facing backward, a long trunk and claws instead of a nose. Wait, what? It's too strange even for science fiction, even for outer space. In its eccentricity, Opabinia was perhaps the loneliest creature on Earth. Scientists couldn't find another species that would be similar to this individual until recently. Meet Utaurora. It seems to belong to the same species as Opabinia. Its inch-long body was divided into 14 to 15 furrows. Each of them ended in a pointed flap. Opabinia had the same body, but it's unlikely that both monsters were friends. The difference between their timelines was several million years. It's hard to imagine why these monsters needed such strange body structures. Why haven't modern filmmakers used the design of those animals to create cool space monsters yet? Okay, they were creepy creatures, but what about weird and kinda useless ones? Scientists have discovered Su, a legless creature with no head turned inside out. Huh? This 444 million-year-old creature was found in South Africa, north of Cape Town. They called it Su after the discoverer's mother. In fact, it's some kind of new arthropod species that may have lived in low-oxygen waters. This creature was turned inside out, and the outer shell with the legs and head was lost. Thanks to mineralization, muscles, tendons, and even Su's intestines were preserved on the fossil. It's a great success to find such detailed remains of an ancient creature. However, scientists still can't determine the evolutionary history of this species. They're sure that it was a primitive marine arthropod. Okay, we can see that 500 million years ago, Earth was filled with creepy monsters, which fortunately are now extinct. But what about trees? Were they the same as we see now? Or was there something else? Something creepy? Oh yeah. Scientists have discovered a new kind of living organism similar to a tree or a mushroom. It was gigantic and had a very minimalistic design. Meet the Prototaxites. It's basically just a big stick with a round end poking out of the ground. It was smooth, didn't have the usual tree bark, and looked more like a mushroom without a cap. But scientists have recently found out that it wasn't a mushroom at all. Prototaxites probably belonged to a previously unknown branch of life. Prototaxites is considered to be the first giant organism in the history of the planet that lived on land. It existed about 420 to 375 million years ago during the Devonian period. It was the time when plants began to spread across dry land, forming large forests. Over time, they began to grow leaves and form roots in the ground. Then, the first seed plants appeared. The real colonization of land began. The first arthropods, such as centipedes, arachnids, and other unpleasant creatures, began to walk among those forests. Meanwhile, the water was filled with a huge biodiversity. There was a giant supercontinent on the planet, and smaller parts began to break off it. During this period, Prototaxites towered over the land. Some of these things reached 26 feet high and 3 feet wide. It's like a 3-story house and as thick as a palm tree. But what was it? A plant? A mushroom? Algae, perhaps? Scientists discovered them in the middle of the 19th century, but only in 2007 did they conduct chemical analysis. Research showed that it was most likely a giant mushroom, but in 2025, scientists refuted this conclusion. It turns out this may have been an unknown life form that existed separately from the kingdom of fungi, animals, plants, and protists. Scientists noticed that the inner part of Prototaxites consisted of a number of tubes. There are similar tubes inside mushrooms, but the tubes of that ancient living thing branched and joined differently. They even had a different chemical composition. The main building block of mushrooms is chitin. But the Prototaxites contained chemicals similar to lignin, a substance found in the bark of trees and other plants. And its anatomy differs from the structure of any other organism known to us. What were they doing on Earth? Just chilled and enjoyed the bloom of life? Did they produce some kind of fruit, like a banana with eyes and claws? Scientists don't know. What if it was something that was brought to Earth from outer space? What if they were flowers planted by another civilization? What do you think?
Just when you think space couldn't get any more weirder? Hey, check my grammar. The universe throws a curveball in the form of a giant glowing bubble that's too perfect to be real. Astronomers have spotted something strange drifting through our galaxy. And it's not a rogue planet, which is a space body the size of a planet that doesn't orbit any star. It's not a star itself either. It's not even your average supernova remnant. It's a perfectly round sphere, and scientists are stunned. Astronomers were going through data from a super powerful radio telescope when they spotted something that looked like a perfect round bubble. At first, they thought it was the leftovers from a massive star explosion called a supernova. But the weird part was that the object was too perfect. Normally, such explosions leave behind messy, uneven clouds. And the newly discovered one looked like someone had drawn it with a compass. The scientists named the space bubble teleos, which means perfect in ancient Greek. They've already looked at all the possible explanations, but none of them really make sense yet. This strange space body was discovered thanks to a telescope in Australia called ASCAP. It's been scanning the sky and finding all kinds of weird circular objects. This research was part of a project called the Evolutionary Map of the Universe. Some of the faraway circles, known as ORCs, which is short for Odd Radio Circles, have already puzzled scientists. But this one is different because it's inside our own galaxy. At the same time, even though Teleos is technically closer to us, scientists can't quite figure out how close it is. And that's making it harder to understand where it came from or how it formed. The researchers have taken an even closer look at this strange space bubble and found something super odd. It only gives off a very faint glow and only in radio waves, not in visible light or X-rays. Based on that glow, They figured it's most likely the leftover shell of a massive star explosion called a Type Ia supernova, one of the brightest and most powerful kinds of explosions in the universe. This kind of explosion happens like this. A super-dense dead star, called a white dwarf, starts stealing material from a nearby star. It keeps sucking in stuff until it just can't handle the weight anymore, then it blows up in a huge burst of energy. Now that part makes sense. But figuring out how far away is this thing? Strangely, it's not so easy. Scientists have run the numbers and ended up with two possible distances for Teleos. Either it's around 7,175 light-years away, or it's much farther, about 25,114 light-years away, give or take. Depending on which distance is right, the size of the bubble could be vastly different. If it's closer, then it's about 46 light-years wide. That would make it a pretty young supernova remnant, maybe less than 1,000 years old. But if it's farther away, then it's a giant 157 light-years across, which could be more than 10,000 years old. So, which one is it? That's where things get tricky. Scientists have models that tell us how these supernova leftovers should behave. And one of the most important things they expect to see is X-rays. But you might remember that Teleos doesn't show any, not a single X-ray in sight. That's the big mystery. How can something that should be glowing with X-rays be totally silent? It just doesn't add up and leaves the scientists very puzzled. Another idea the scientists are considering is that Teleos might not be a regular supernova remnant at all. Instead, it might be the leftovers from a rarer kind of explosion called a Type Lax supernova. And this one? It's extra weird. In a normal Type Ia supernova, the white dwarf star blows itself to bits. But in a Type Lax supernova, it doesn't get totally destroyed. It kind of survives, turning into a zombie star. Ooh. It's damaged, but it's still around. This would actually explain a lot about how Teleos looks and glows. But in this case, it would have to be much closer to us, only about 3,262 light-years away. That would also make it a lot smaller, about 11 light-years wide. The coolest thing here is that there's actually a star at that distance that could be the zombie star that caused all this. But, and it's a big but, like I have, when scientists use other ways to try and measure how far away Teleos is, none of them agree that it could be this close. So, sadly, this theory hits a bit of a wall. Then there's another strange thing. Teleos' nearly perfect spherical shape. That's not normal. Usually supernova explosions are kind of messy and uneven. The blast might push into clouds of space dust or gas, or parts of the explosion might move faster than others. Eventually, the shell that forms gets all lumpy or starts to break apart. But in this case, the object is almost perfectly round, like a balloon, and that's super rare. The only way something could stay this neat and round is if it exploded in a very empty part of space and expanded smoothly in all directions. That's actually not impossible, just really, really rare. Now, considering its unique, probably unnatural shape, could Teleos be an artificial object? Could it be a Dyson sphere? That's a hypothetical megastructure that could completely surround a star and harvest all of its energy. At first, this idea was supposed to explain how we might detect intelligent extraterrestrial life by spotting the energy they use rather than waiting for them to send us a message. You see, here on Earth, we only receive a tiny bit of the sun's energy. Meanwhile, a whopping 386 billion megawatts are shooting out into space in all directions. Not to waste such a giant amount of energy, a civilization could build a Dyson sphere, or more realistically, a Dyson swarm, loads of solar panels orbiting the star. It would help them capture every bit of that power to run their planet, technology, AI systems, and maybe even space travel across galaxies. To understand just how advanced a Dyson sphere-building species would have to be, scientists use the Kardashev scale. It ranks civilizations by how much energy they can use. Type 1 can use all the energy available on their home planet. Spoiler, we're not even there yet. Type 2 can harness all the energy from their star. That's the Dyson sphere level. Type 3 can use energy from an entire galaxy. Think Dyson spheres around every star and even extracting energy from black holes. Right now, Earth's civilization ranks about Type 0.7449, give or take. That means that we haven't even maxed out the energy available to us on Earth, including fossil fuels, renewables, and nuclear power. We're still taking baby steps on this cosmic scale. Anyway, the problem with the theory that our perfectly shaped object could be a Dyson sphere is that this example of super advanced technology would give off heat. In other words, there would be thermal infrared radiation, and the object would be unusually bright in the infrared. This could be a sign that something artificial is absorbing the star's energy and re-emitting it as heat. But the scientists have found no heat signatures or anything like that when observing Teleos. So, do we have the final answer? Not yet. The scientists have looked at all the existing clues, how bright the thing is, how big it looks, and how far it might be, and none of the possibilities are totally perfect. Each idea has a problem, especially the fact that we're not observing any X-rays, which should be there according to the usual rules. They still think that regular Type LA supernova idea is the best bet for now, but they're not 100% sure. There's just not enough proof to say for certain. So, the mystery continues. The team says we'll need more powerful and detailed observations to really figure out what happened here. But in any case, if something like Teleos can exist, what else is out there, waiting to challenge everything we know about the universe? That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a